It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
December 17th, 2025. Hallelujah. Thank you for joining me today. So let me fill you all in on some issues that we've been having. And you may be wondering why the video looks slightly different and you can see the outlines of the setup. For those that haven't seen the last couple of shows, or actually the last show and then the couple of podcasts, including AM Wake Up that I had to struggle through, or AM Wake Up I wasn't able to do, we went through some pretty crazy technological issues. Basically a week leading up to it when I couldn't, certain issues were happening on StreamYard almost anywhere I was. And then one of the last shows I did, or the last show I did, so everything just kind of spun out. I still don't even really know what's going on and what happened. And it still very well could just be some kind of a glitch or user error. It doesn't seem that way to me. But ultimately last time I wasn't able to get the audio to work or the video, depending on which browser I was using. Long story short, to not waste too much time, there was a whole bunch of stuff that was happening on the backside, things that were coming up on my computer. I'm starting to worry that there's something going on with the computer. So today, all day, I'm trying to troubleshoot this. I don't really have the resources to be able to bring somebody in to try to figure this out. So I'm kind of, which is what most people in independent media are doing. So I'm trying to figure this out to deal with what I have today, because the show has to go on, right? So ultimately, I was trying different computers, different browsers, and after all sorts of different trials and errors, nothing was working. I'm able to use Firefox, I've never used before for some unknown reason, but only while the VPN is on. Hopefully, that manages to continue to work, I guess, in the meantime. If you're having issues, let me know. Let me know if the audio sounds wrong. Let me know if the video's not working. We're going to go either way. I mean, if I have to record this and put it out somewhere or have somebody else post it for me, you know me, I'm not going to stop doing the work. But it's important to reach new people, that it's not like, for example, the last show with the audio in the beginning, which I'm clearing my throat before we get started. And that's coming through on the audio for some reason, even though it was pulled back. It's all sorts of weird things like that. So I'm honestly not worried about the look today. It's not that much different, but let me know if you have anything else that's going on. I could just like scoot the camera forward, but I was worried that might mess something up. The world we live in today, guys. And on that note, something we're going to talk about today, I had basically put off about maybe more than half of the show that I had lined up, discussing a lot of the current events. I was going to go into the recent, make sure I just grab it so I give you guys the full overview I was looking at. I was going to touch on Tyler Robinson just a brief bit, but I was going to touch on the Turtle Island Liberation Front discussion. Robert's currently working on an article for that, which will probably come out tomorrow, and a couple of overlapping points. And the Intercept article I shared today, as always, FBI informant, FBI agent, both of which were involved with this. It's absurd how obvious this is, to the point to where it seems obvious that we're talking about agents who are cultivating, driving, and then using their influence over like underling type people who are eager to be seen to get them to end up carrying out attacks, which sure, crimes were, if you consider what ultimately happened, or, in cases, what could happen, people could argue that those people deserve punishment for even considering what they were doing. That's a different conversation. Not even sure if I agree with that. The point is how easy it is for influential people to manipulate others, especially in regard to people that are, mentally deficient and so on, which has happened more than once with the FBI. But that's all to say it's important. We will talk about that likely tomorrow or the next day. Today, I wanted to talk about something that it's a larger conversation that I've been talking about a lot, that just, it caught my attention so much with what it looks like and what I think it's going to be, and just how alarmingly like futuristic next level, but right now, this kind of stuff is. We're going to talk about that, overlapping with the topic I was going to get to in the last show, discussing geoengineering and how that overlaps with all of this, the whole blotting out the sun to save us all from climate change, and all of this happening during Trump's administration right now, which may seem confounding unless you understand that it's all the same thing and the parties are meant to confuse you and make you look somewhere else. But on top of that, I'm going to get into these. I have it all lined up. Updates on a couple different discussions around shootings, points about Israel influence, Venezuela, which I think is very important, discussions around that, what's happening, the blockade. I mean, these are all things we've been discussing. And a couple other points I was going to get to as well around Israel, but we're going to be coming back to that. So today, what I want to get into is optogenetics, magnetogenetics, the gene therapy overlap, the where this is going, where it's been really during COVID-19 and well before that, and how this all comes together with where I think it's going with the future that they're signaling, the technocratic control structure, everything else we're discussing that, like I said, exactly in the title, like this is what I feared. This is exactly what I've been talking about ferritin nanoparticles. That's the magnogenetic side of it. The radiogenetics or the optogenetics, slightly different versions of a similar conversation. That is those are also in the same larger umbrella point of the, which we'll get into, of the type of I guess where it was at first was sort of invasive, like fiber optics or fibers or wiring going into your brain machine interface. But as I said then, even with Elon Musk and Neuralink, it felt like sort of a pump, that was the clumsy version of what they want you to think they're working on, when they're way beyond that, sort of like the surveillance and like nanotech stuff. It's they're pointing to cameras and we're way beyond that. But the point is that the optogenetics part of it, the magnetogenetics part, it goes way beyond even the interface part. It goes to remote control. Not the way you might think of that in the most benign sense, but literally being able to influence at the smallest level cells, bodily process, or like we talked about before, insulin production with certain lighting or certain magnetic forces. If something's already been planted inside you, let's say, for example, through a genetically engineered virus and nanotechnology, like the shots that were given, not even a joke at all. It's exactly what they frame it as. Exactly. Not to say that's what it was, but the opening is there for this kind of experimentation. What we went through recently and what we're still seeing to this very day should make us ask these questions. And where this all connects is what they're currently leaning into through Darpa right now, their generative optogenetics program. And it's what they literally lay out. That, it doesn't have to be alarming and nefarious, but with what we know of the people that are in power in our government, both sides, if you see it that way, it's what they're capable of and what they've already done that makes this so concerning for me. And we've talked about the overlap of the technocratic side of this with the network state, the reimagining of society, the Great Reset, all the same thing as far as I can tell right now. And then the geoengineering part of it that we didn't get to, that I want to overlap, that really does connect with this larger, just you'll see when we go through all this and what it means, the sort of playing God part of all of this. And in a way, it could just be something that is being done for control, but it also could be almost what my gut tells me is sort of creating a choke point, something that can be used to essentially hold people hostage. So it has to continue. And that'll make sense once we get into it all. But thank you for tuning in today. Let's start with a point that I wanted to shout out that I saw Steve end up sharing this. And I just decided to sign up for it because it's just one more possible spot to get people to see the content that are being constantly suppressed and pushed away from us. I was just thinking this morning, for example. I was looking at the channels we have, and I've been pretty consistently using the TLAV Center's YouTube pirate channel just because they haven't been censoring us on there lately. And I was thinking to myself, how does somebody brand new who comes in and looks at this channel with 1,000 subscribers, not that I care at all about the perception. It's about getting the content out and hopefully reaching people. But that they may look at that and then go, oh, this is some little small thing, we're not going to give any attention to it, not considering that we've had over 100,000 followers deleted by YouTube, and then over another, I think, 60,000 followers deleted by the second channel by YouTube, and all of the other, 75 pirate channels, which each has 3,000 followers more. It's just funny to think about the way that they create the perception, even, just almost like just relentless push with what they do, knowing we see them, but almost generationally, these things just kind of fade out of view. It's fascinating, but that's an over point to like everything we're talking about and how the long game is what they're playing here, right? Just in hopes that we just don't stay the course, that we don't keep focusing, that we don't, that we get pulled away into some partisan conversation and we lose sight of what's actually happening. But all that to say that I signed up for this new platform. I guess that I rambled I made 2 points there. This platform is something I thought I could put out for you guys to ultimately find another way if you want to support us. But I want to make sure I point out, and this is not, everyone out there that already supports us and signed up on different platforms. I'm not out there asking you to sign up again. right? I mean, if you want to, feel free, but this is for somebody who may want a new platform. Maybe you want to switch away from some of the others that might be concerning you right now. I'm not too familiar with it, but as we've said in the past, it's just another platform to ultimately sign up for you guys to support the work, donate, tip, however else. But I'll include this. It's called Ko-fi. Now, I want to start with a couple of points, 3 really, that stand out to me in a larger kind of setting the table, what we talked about with where the current political structure is, where Trump's administration is. One is from the Maha perspective. Another ProPublica report that done some good work recently. This is December 8th. Under former chemical industry insiders, Trump EPA nearly doubles amount of formaldehyde considered safe to inhale. Now, I don't know how you can't, the consistency of the wrong choice, you can't accidentally make there's what's driving this administration, or more accurately, this government, all of it, is not American interests. Clearly, this is about industry. This is about corporate. They don't care that this is dangerous for you. This is about opening the right. We don't basically they're trying to pretend they're leaning into your, we want less government, low regulations mindset, but no, none of that applies to you in any way. You feign at jaywalking, you're going to jail. Them over there, though, they get every possible leeway. They get every possible opening. They can dump in their water. They can double the amounts of unsafe things. They can put dioxins and glyphosate and everything in the world. And it's freedom, isn't it? Except for you. The overlap is not exactly correct because we're talking about legal, jaywalking. My point is simply that I was thinking about that the other day too. That it's as the individual people, average people, the smallest deviation and they choose to, they could throw the book at you, as it were. Of course, if you're Peter Thiel or any variation therein of insider oligarch elitist, that's not the same way this works for you. And that is damn near ubiquitous, despite what side you may think you're on. That's worth noting. But this is just another example of the wrong choice from the administration claiming they're rolling back all the problems. Like, for example, Stephen Miller's out there right now talking about how they're the ones rolling back the empire. And Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, just rips them apart. Like, you're a joke. That's ridiculous. You guys are absolutely screaming in the wrong direction. And then you just yell the narrative. That's always kind of how it's gone. But today it's just become cartoonish, like the same old example. Literally losing a 0-7 court ruling and just claiming you won 7-0. Just why not? Just yell out loud what you think you want people to think, and all the screaming followers will say the same. And things like this fall by the wayside. But things like this is what we've been telling you. Anybody paying attention has been sensing this. I thought maybe the Kash Patel part of it was going to be the one that seemed to stand out the most, or maybe the Bondi. There's people the ones that stood out to be the most problematic. Now, Noam seems to be, all of them seem as how they're mindless, yes, men and women that don't really know what they're doing. Seems to make sense. My opinion anyway. FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino is stepping down in January. So it says, right? Maybe that's going to change. Maybe it's, as Sam Husseini's been pointing out about a lot of the things, maybe it's wag the dog to distract from Epstein files or something else. But I was laughing about this. You can't stand there 30 seconds ago with everybody else and go, we're so strong and we're great and we're winning and we're happy with everything and we've never done better, and then quit. Clearly, that was all BS. And we know this, though. Hopefully, most people know this, whether it's your side or any other side. It's always the same thing for politics. Lastly, you might have seen this article from New York Times. Trump's top aide, technically, I believe it was from, I think it was a different platform that they're covering their conversation. Oh, yeah, Vanity Fair. Trump's top aide, Susie Wiles, some call him or her his handler. And that's not some kind of a joke. I mean, there's very real discussions to be had about how she seems to the insiders around him, almost the door between him and everything else, and seems to be involved in most of the decision-making. But these are secondhand reports, so you can take it for what you will. Also, the Israel connection, which is impossible to ignore. Which one, Ryan? Yeah, good question. Almost every single one of them in his administration. In interviews with Vanity Fair, Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, and President Trump's said President Trump, quote, has an alcoholic's personality, and called J.D. Vance a conspiracy theorist, and concluded that Pam Bondi, quote, completely whiffed the early handling of the Epstein files. And there's more statements like that are very degrading. Why would that be happening? Hard to say, but it's just not looking good and strong like the way they want to project. Now, on that note, the reason that's important to see is just to recognize that you, average people, the way I read it, are seeing through it. No matter what side we're talking about, we're just not buying it anymore. I think that's a really positive thing to recognize. And people like this administration or any of them are going to do their best to make your life very unhappy until you fall back in line. Pretty much how I've always seen it go. So stay the course. Now, on this direction, guys, this is what really concerns me. What I'm going to overlap this first part with, this is a post. I'm not familiar. I just started following him. The account's Mehdi. He seems to be really excited about this. At least I get the sense maybe there's some concern, but also excitement from this post. I reached out to him and just said, hey, you want to come on for an interview? Because he seems to know what he's talking about. We can discuss where this goes. If he reaches out, I'll let you know. But I'm going to get into this overlap of just what this post is and what is the Darpa Generative Optogenetics. Overlap that with some discussions of what we've already discussed in the past, or some points we've made in the past. Whitney's article, Coronavirus Gives a Dangerous Boost to DARPA's Darkest Agenda. And things we've talked about in the past that we're going to revisit slightly. Things like this discussion from the Rockefeller Institute, or the one we've shown before, the genetically engineered magnetoprotein remotely controls brain. Now, these are magnetogenetic points, but it does overlap with optogenetics. We'll get into them as they discuss them. But I wanted to set that in your mind because this is where this inevitably goes. And you'll see as they make these arguments themselves and overlap this with the COVID-19 shot reality that's currently there right now, self-amplifying that they're leaning into, as well as the current COVID shot. And yet still in the circles, it's like, hey, they ended mRNA, we're winning. But they didn't at all, even, not at all. They just stopped a few versions of it and still even leaned into the current COVID shot. The one right now, the one that's currently for 2026. It's already out there. That's mRNA and everything. But yet, weirdly, the narrative is they ended mRNA. Doesn't that seem interesting, confounding, how ridiculous it is today for some people? But this overlaps for a reason, because I believe that this does play a factor, the shots that were given. Now, Mehdi writes, I believe DARPA just launched the most audacious bioengineering program of the decade, and nobody's talking about it loud enough. Frankly, I don't think, this came out, rather he posted this on the 13th. Let me see if the post even had a date on it. They don't often do that. So let's just say the 13th or earlier. I don't know anybody talking about this outside of niche discussions, right? I mean, this is earth shattering. This is legitimately this is the kind, artificial intelligence, for example. Think of the level of change that brings to the world, like paradigm shifting, right? That's what this is. You're going to see this. This is and then you overlap that, dovetail that with 6G and artificial intelligence with no overview, no state regulation. And this becomes far more alarming. But you have to understand that what we're talking about is the way they're applying it, rather, in regard to outside manipulation of cells, gene therapy from afar, the kind of thing that will revolutionize or dramatically change everything we know about science, medicine, and a bunch of other stuff, weapons. So he goes on to say, I spent hours reading through the Generative Optogenetics program documentation. And honestly, I'm still processing the implications of what they're trying to build. Now, to be objective, you could also argue or add positive things, right? Because it's really, ultimately, any of these things, even a weapon is a tool, right? It can still, a person with good intentions, arguably, could use anything to try to do something for a positive outcome. That being said, a weapon is still a weapon, and it can still hurt people. And in this case, you could argue that these things, like for Neuralink, different point, some slightly extension or connection to this point, since that's where some of these started. But the point is, they could be used to, let Parkinson's people, or rather, remove that, or let people reuse their limbs, and all the things that probably also will happen. But there's also all of the alarming things that go along with that we've talked about. We'll touch on more of that with the Whitney's article. But just thinking about that, though, it's like anything else. It's what they intend to do with it, and what we know of DARPA and what they've already discussed shows you where they're aiming with this. And with what we already went through with COVID-19, there's really no denying the door that's already been kicked open. He says this is about creating molecular machines that can be expressed in living cells to translate optical signals directly into DNA and RNA sequences on demand. Now, this is what he's writing, but I'm going to read you directly from their information and multiple studies discussing this exact thing. So thinking molecular machines, doesn't that bring back to mind something we've discussed many times? Which is, I believe, it's not standing out for me right now. Where was that? Oh, that's right. It was this. There it is. Right. Charles Lieber, virus-sized transistors, Harvard Magazine. And you know where this connects. If you follow this show, we've talked about Bob Langer, the scientific co-founder of Moderna, and his work intersecting with Charles Lieber And now Charles Lieber was and is apparently the leading scientist in the world on nanotechnology, and just happened to be arrested right before COVID-19, shuttling biological material back and forth from Beth Israel Hospital to China. And he got a slap on the wrist. Apparently, he never even stopped doing his scientific research, even while he's being investigated for treason. You can look it up. That's insane. And with China, mind you, while we're being told China's working to kill the world. See, the whole thing seems to have been a theater show, at least in regard to what they were being projected. Maybe Trump believed it. Who knows? But if you can prove that that's the case, which we can, how are you going to argue that they're going, China's trying to kill us all and Trump's in power? And yet here's Charles Lieber working through NIH and other groups to work with China on the same studies all the way through, and now still doing it. Side point, but just worth noting every time. But so this was a key part of the larger conversation, not just the COVID-19, that's just a part that stood out, but the technology and where it's going and the alarming uses. Virus-sized transistors, for example, now, again, could be used in a way to help people. Also could be used in ways that are dystopianly terrifying, but overlapping this back to the original thing, or his post, or what he wrote about it, molecular machines that can be expressed in living cells. Now, it's different though, right? Now we're talking about expressed, like you could using these things in ways, or rather being cued with other things first, as an injection, for example, and then using these optogenetic signals to express something. Like during COVID-19, we talked about the idea of, like, this is really what those shots were doing, training your body to create something that it wouldn't otherwise create. So think about where this is going. Think of the simplest way, and there's a lot of overlaps to this, would be talking about something that instead of a shot, having to go, yes, I consent, give me that injection, to something that you aren't even aware is happening. And it ends up in the same result. Not necessarily the vaccine element, but that's one part of this conversation. Now, I'm saying all this out front, but we're going to go through a lot of these studies. To translate optical signals directly into DNA and RNA sequences on demand. Think about what this means, he says. You shine specific wavelengths of light at a cell. Now, again, that's the small, direct view, but we could do this on a larger scale as well. And it writes its own genetic code in real time. So you shine specific wavelengths of light at a cell, and it writes its own genetic code in real time without any external DNA delivery. And no viral vectors, no CRISPR, cassettes, no, just light triggering nucleotide incorporation based on photon wavelength. All right, so you don't need the viral vector or DNA delivery, like the shot version. It says this is a foundational shift in how we interface with biology, because right now, if you want to deliver genetic instructions, like a COVID shot, to cells, you need massive supply chains, synthesis facilities, cold storage delivery mechanisms that break down over distance. So limitations, right? Darpa Go, that's this Darpa Generative Optogenetics, they're calling it Darpa Go, wants to turn living cells into programmable biological systems. I mean, just that alone, they want to turn your cells, or any cells, living cells, animals, nature, whatever, but that includes you. That's the obvious, when you see the actual point, that's what they're aiming at. Solving disease, it's always the claim, right? Turn living cells into programmable biological systems. Yeah, that can't be abused in a horrifying way that can't be tracked and could never be turned around. Like, that's insane, guys. Now, maybe I'm completely missing, maybe it's not even possible. But with what they've already seen and what we've discussed and what the research shows, it obviously is, and everything they've done before has been abused. I mean, am I wrong? You name one thing that that somebody hasn't abused. So knowing that, opening this door seems insane. Too late. It's already open. And it says the programmable biological systems where you can transmit genetic information massively via optical signals. And the cell synthesizes the exact sequence you need using its own machinery. The implications are absolutely wild. So one thing Whitney's talked about is living foundries. That's exactly what you could argue. That's one part of the COVID-19 discussion, creating the platform in your body to create the thing that they can trigger from the outside. Arguably, that might have been the very point of what the COVID shot was, reaching that goal. The implications are absolutely wild, he writes. Single cell spatial resolution, temporal precision to deliver different messages, sequentially remote scalable dissemination of genetic instructions. Imagine regenerative medicine, where you shine light patterns on damaged tissue and cells reprogram themselves. Think about that. Yeah, that's incredible. What about the reverse? I mean, I hate to be the the voice of reason to understand that this is always where it goes, but this is what dual use stuff is like. And it seems like everything they present these days for a medical purpose can be used the other way. Now, that doesn't apply to everything you talk about in some kind of medical discussion. In this case, it just needs to be understood that this can be turned into a weapon. And they acknowledge that. So that worries the hell out of me with what they're currently doing, while DARPA seems hell-bent and focused, and always has been, on the universal soldier direction that Hegseth is screaming about. It says agriculture. Oh, no, I missed one. Manufacturing, where bacterial cultures synthesize complex molecules on command via optical programming. Manufacturing, bacterial cultures. I mean, you could overlap that with the fake meat conversation, or any number of different points where you're manufacturing. But this, I keep saying that, but I'm just so fascinated. The way he writes this out is just, it really did catch my attention. Agriculture, where crops adapt their genome in response to environmental light signals, or the insect allies conversation. That was DARPA, by the way. I probably grabbed that actually. There it is. We covered this on the platform too, but I don't want to waste time to grab it. Independent. U.S. military plan to spread viruses using insects could create new class of biological weapon. Scientists around the world signed these petitions and warned, and they ended up pulling it back because of that. But that to me very clearly got turned into the COVID conversation, to GMO mosquitoes, like all kinds of other things, including, here, I can just play this really quickly. Why not? Because it actually fits perfectly. Because we're talking about the self-amplifying shots. This video overlaps with COVID when they were discussing at a kind of a symposium in Europe that was massive. The US was included right in the beginning of COVID about self-spreading vaccines and the future of that, but show you the overlap when it comes to agriculture. And I think that's important for the point he just made.
Since the outbreak of COVID-19, the word virus has been dominating media headlines as well.
See, I'm using a new browser now, so maybe I don't have it set up right. I can't hear it. Can you guys hear the video? Let me know. I'm going to play it again.
Since the outbreak of COVID, infectious solutions are also being developed for food and agriculture.
In the chat, let me know if you can hear that.
And are currently making their way through the.
In the meantime, this was ultimately the conversation. So they talked about using viruses, insects that would spread them, and then use them to essentially protect crops. But they very clearly came out and said, it is playing. Okay, good. They clearly came out and said, that's a weapon, right? Like, if that's the way that goes, then you could use them to destroy crops, right? Yes, that was the obvious answer. So it's the same point. Okay, good. Thank you, guys. I just want to make sure, because I couldn't hear it at all on my end, so I'll have to figure that out. That sucks, though. So I have not many videos today. In the future, when I have more videos, if I'm using this platform, I got to figure that out, because I like to hear them and respond. Hey, but maybe finally I'll let the video play all the way through without stopping it. You guys will love that.
Since the outbreak of COVID-19, the word virus has been dominating media headlines as well as our daily lives. Did you know that one approach that has been proposed to control virally transmitted diseases is by releasing a virally transmitted vaccine? Unlike traditional vaccines, infectious vaccines do not require any individual consent. Infectious solutions are also being developed for food and agriculture and are currently making their way through the regulatory approval process. However, do we really want to intentionally disperse these modified viruses outside the lab? Is this a forward march of science or a mistake? Join our live event.
But do we really want to? I can't hear it, but I remember the video. I've played it many times. The answer is no, we don't want to risk that, but they did anyway. That's what happened, right? Well before 2020, by the way, but that was already going on. And so to bring this back to the point, this is a different conversation, but there is the overlap, right? So going back to his point, showing you I'll explain the overlap for those that may not recognize the connection, right? Where were we? Right here. Agriculture, where crops adapt their genome in response to environmental light signals, right? So we're talking about the same, that we're going to get to is the genetic engineer or the genetic editing gene therapy point, and using this to get that point. There's many other ways it can be used. That's my focal point today. There's lots of them we could focus on. So the overlap is the same. They're toying and playing with God with these things. And so the idea that overlaps with all of it, I find very relevant. And and then also the simple fact that they're willing to experiment with life so frivolously, which very much overlaps with the geoengineering point we're going to get to at the end. Now it says, what fascinates me most, he continues, is that this high-risk program, see, he does say high risk, so I get the sense that there is some awareness of that from him, acknowledges we're building a direct interface between computers that design genetic sequences and living cells that execute them. So that may be more easy to wrap your mind around. A direct interface between computers, wherever they're using them. This is not connected by wires, understand. That's what the optogenetics point is at this point in time. At one point, it was something like wires or fiber optics. Not anymore, at least in some of the discussions we're having. A direct interface between computers that design genetic sequences and the living cells that execute them. It says we're not just editing genes anymore. See, this is where I'm going with this. We're creating a bidirectional communication protocol between silicon and carbon, where light becomes the universal language. Is it just me, or is that crazy and alarming to anybody else? Like, I get how that could end up in a positive outcome, but it could. But the idea of that, now you get into the level of like a constant universal kind of like exchange, to where, especially when you overlap that with like the idea of where the technology is going and 6G and like meshing and what already might be used, you get to a point to where this could be influencing you in ways you don't even understand and don't even recognize or ever acknowledge. I mean, they talked in the past about like putting lithium in the water supply because that'd be better for everybody. Why wouldn't they rationalize doing something that would just completely I know, whatever you want to take. I don't want to be too crazy about it, but these are all possible things. Like Catherine, I'm jumping edge to touch because I don't want to, there's an overlap I can't stop thinking about that Catherine and I talked about with neuroweapons, neuroscience. Now, this is a different conversation, but the point is I think these are starting to intersect. Neuroscience is the nervous system and really just manipulating you in ways like Catherine talked about, like through your television, do signals in the same way. This is more focused specifically on one part versus the whole nervous system, but it's the same ultimate point, at least as I see it. Please let me know what you think. Now, it goes on to say, if the generative optogenetics of Darpa succeeds, it unlocks programmable biology at a scale we've never seen before. This is how you get to foundational capabilities for extended space flight, which seems to be the thing they're all saying. That's what we're doing it for. I doubt it. For on-demand therapeutics for manufacturing without brittle supply networks. This is the kind of moonshot that changes everything. Now, what he doesn't say right there about extended space flight is it essentially ends up like changing your species in a way. That's what they're actually saying, like genetically altering the human body using like weird genes from other animals to allow you to survive extended space flight. That's one of the things they propose. And we'll go through it right now. Now, just that opening, it's like if you just casually discuss this to somebody, never talked to them, they'd think you were crazy. Oh, it's a conspiracy theory. It's really not. This is the current level of what they at least claim they're doing. And that usually we need to stand back and recognize means that that's what they were doing 20 years ago. And I can prove that. Maybe not 20 years ago, but most likely, I would bet. The point is that what are they doing now? This is where they were. This is what they're willing to show us. Where are they currently at? Always history shows us that's the case. What we're being presented with, the military's been using for 20 years, like kind of a joking, kind of, what's the right word? Just being loose with it, like not 20 were in every single point, but the joke is that that's almost always what ends up happening. So think about where we are with what this is. Well, let me add this to the notes for you guys. As always, those new to the show, everything we discuss will be down in the show notes when we're done. Now, here's just their page. Generative optogenetics. That's the image I used. I'm going to play their little clip so you can see it. Synthetic DNA. Here's what they write. Synthetic DNA and RNA molecules are foundational to a host of next generation technologies, crucial for, this is what I find so strange. Next generation technologies crucial for national security and global well-being, impacting everything from resilient supply chains and advanced materials manufacturing to sustainable agriculture and human health. Yeah, exactly my point. Everyone's focusing on the health and the space. What do you mean national security? What do you mean global well-being, supply chains and manufacturing, sustainable agriculture? Yeah. So apparently they're just going like what we just discussed, but the next level. Explain for me how optogenetics in regard to influencing gene and cell production is going to be about national security, unless you're talking about weaponizing it in military use, which is probably already where it is. Global well-being, unless you're talking about, I don't know, influencing people's status or state of mind, supply chains. I mean, what does that even mean? I can't even like fathom. So this is universal in their mind. And like I said, a paradigm shift, which is not hard to see. It says harnessing the power of light to direct the synthesis of DNA and RNA directly with living cells. If successful, the high-risk, high-reward research program promises to revolutionize medicine, agriculture, and manufacturing by enabling a new era of bioprogramming. Like just right there, bioprogramming. Explain for me manufacturing. Agriculture, yes, we get it. You want to bioengineer things and make them grow. That's exactly what we're all afraid of. Medicine, same point. Manufacturing, national security, you get it, guys. There is another level to this that is alarming at like from a Trump-Biden administration use, from foreign government, foreign policy, from things that are alarming and always have been, and it's always what this ends up being used for. Here's the video we'll play for you. Similar points to what we just, I guess I do have a video. Where was that? Right here.
Synthetic DNA and RNA molecules could enable a host of next-generation technologies crucial for national security and global well-being. However, current methods for creating these molecules from scratch face significant limitations in terms of their scale, complexity, and use of hazardous chemicals. Darpa's Generative Optogenetics program, GO, seeks to harness the power of light to direct the synthesis of DNA and RNA directly within living cells. If successful, this high-risk, high-reward research program has the potential to revolutionize medicine, agriculture, and manufacturing. GO aims to unlock an era of programmable biology where we can communicate with and direct cell behavior with unprecedented speed, precision, and reach via optical signals. Performers on GO will design protein complexes that, when expressed in a living cell, use light-triggered signaling to deliver genetic information, instructing cells to incorporate specific building blocks based on different wavelengths of light to synthesize specific DNA or RNA sequences on demand. The GO program focuses on two main research objectives. The first is achieving the core capability of synthesizing DNA or RNA directly in living cells using optical signals. The second focuses on developing error mitigation methods that ensure high-fidelity nucleic acid synthesis. For more information on the GO program, including how to respond to the solicitation, please visit.
So, obviously, there's always, I guess you could say, unexpected consequences. Maybe it's not unexpected, but overall, what we're talking about is something that will inevitably lead to things that aren't what you would expect or what they would tell you is going to be happening. One of the obvious overlaps, here's Wired, biohackers encoded malware in a strand of DNA. Like there's very obvious ways that this could be manipulated, used, abused, weaponized, which we already talked about. But it's more my concern about what, the playing God level of what may happen that you can't take back. I mean, we're talking at the genetic level, things that you may alter that can't ever be reversed. I don't know why. I mean, this is the same conversation we had about gain of function, about, that these are things that they're doing that they can't put back. We already see this with glyphosate. The entire world has been drenched in, or dioxins, which seems to be growing to the same kind of level, or even PFAS. They just completely, Trump's administration just removed that concern, meaning that it's still a problem. It's getting worse and they no longer care about it. But yeah, make America healthy again, guys. This is not what we want. Now, here's an article from Hinckliffe that I'll discuss. This is just how they overview. I'll read you some of the points from here. They pluck out some important things. DARPA's Generative Optogenetics seeks to program biology using light, could aid in extended human spaceflight. Now it says, as of today, no existing technology enables massless information transfer to relay genetic instructions to living cells. All current approaches require some mechanism predicated on moving matter that encodes the genetic information, typically DNA, RNA, nucleic acids, across biological barriers like a cell wall membrane, like the I always do that, blood-brain barrier. I really believe, I think we've talked about this many times. I don't even think it's that hard of a sell for most people. Whatever you think COVID-19 was, and whether you think there was a real engagement or the real shot, whatever, there was experimentation that was taking place. You can't hide from that anymore. It's insanely obvious. So when we talk about, for example, the PCR test and the insane, like obvious on its face reality that they did not need to jam that into your blood-brain barrier in any sense, seeing as how they did that, causing kids to have nosebleeds, and then went to like just barely swabbing your mouth for the rest of the time. Or like right inside your nose, right? You don't need that to do what they claimed. So what were they doing that whole time? I mean, that's a very real question, guys, that does not add up. And the reality is that I've come to about 3 or 4 different points that show you that there was something that was happening. And in this case, what I think one of these possibilities is we're talking about a relay of information using those vectors. And whether they knew they were doing that or not, or I could certainly be wrong, I think it's worth considering that we're talking about an extension of this same kind of genetic, same experimentation, right? Because so what I think they're leading to is some kind of like, think about the technocratic side of this. And the idea we're discussing about how when you get to that point, the panopticon we're discussing, whether, theoretical or not, that you're trapped in sort of a, technocratic panopticon idea. Then my point is that, and clearly, the stated interest is to drive you to a point where, they can ultimately dictate what you can and can't do, like with the China point. They can shut you off. They can turn your money off. They can box you out of society. That's what they literally talk about. So think about that in the context of something a little bit more unseen. The idea about creating a situation where, you no longer have the ability to disagree, or this is also like, here's another overlapping point before I continue. And you guys will remember this. This was I talked about a lot during COVID-19. More than once, the U.S. government and through the NIH and other platforms, other scientific discussions, this is funded from the NIH, PubMed, National Library of Medicine, compulsory moral bioenhancement should be covert. Now, this, of course, applied at the point to whether they were going to do something like secretly give you a shot without your knowledge, but realize this goes to anything they're talking about. Meaning that if they decide that this might be better for everybody, like literally look up the discussion that's had more than once over the years about putting some kind of pharmaceutical in the water because, it's best for everybody, right? It'll make everybody calm and they've had real conversations about that. So compulsory, meaning you have to do it, moral bioenhancement. So this would be something that might be used to bioenhance you to be a better human being. And ultimately, they argue it should be secret because it's best for you and you're all not going to understand. That's the gist of what this reads. It's very clear. My argument for this is that if he writes, moral bioenhancement ought to be compulsory, that's a good big jump to start with, right? Then its administration is a matter of public health. And therefore, that reason should be governed by public health ethics. I argue that the covert administration of a compulsory moral bioenhancement program better conforms to public health ethics than does an overt one. Right, because secretly giving you something that alters your body has always been the better moral choice, right? These social engineers and tech and the idea that these paternal mindsets that we know better for you is terrifying, and it's been there the entire time. And so that is also what we're dealing with right now. So here he go, and so that was the point there about the discussion of RNA and the vectors they were using, and then bringing this to a level to where it's something you don't see, and you can't say no to. At least at one level that I see this going to. Now it says the primary point of contact for the DARPA GEO program is Dr. Matthew J. Pava, who joined DARPA as a program manager in March 2021. He is the program manager for several DARPA programs, including, this one stood out, bio-inspired restoration of aged concrete edifices, or BRACE as the acronym, which aims to prolong the serviceability of Department of War structures and airfield pavements by integrating a self-repair capability into existing concrete, meaning nanotechnology. The only one way you can have self-repair, that's nanotechnology stuff. Brought to mind, interestingly, the Lahaina conversation. And the stuff we tried to call attention to that the mainstream alternative media just didn't want to talk about for, I think, obvious reasons, of the nanotech that was involved with whatever, I forget the name of what the company was. They sprayed all that stuff over everything. We talked about that being used in Afghanistan, used to stop the sand from flying everywhere and ultimately cause massive sandstorms because of what they used. All these different conversations. The point is not that. The point is about the idea that he's involved with a self-repair nanotech conversation. I just find that, I think about where this all intersects. And it goes on to say, prior to becoming a program manager at DARPA, Dr. Pava, quote, was a senior scientist at the Human Services and Autonomy Research Area. Interesting. At Lockheed Martin's Advanced Technology Laboratories, where he led research teams as a principal investigator on multiple projects, including DARPA-funded research in areas of mobile health, physiological monitoring, and bioinformatics, according to his bio. Interesting how all that overlaps with what we're discussing. Like, you have to see that you could talk about optogenetics in a way that is completely, not about influencing human behavior, but it seems like this is something he focuses on. Looking at Dr. Pava's Darpa projects, we see his work involving manufacturing capabilities, brace and switch, the acronyms, as well as work involving the treatment of traumatic brain injuries, called Cornerstone, the latter of which he inherited from previous program manager Dr. Eric Van Giesen. Where else could Darpa Go's technology lead, they ask? Well, here's a quote from this is RAND Technology Approaches to Human Performance Enhancement, November 2021. Quote, genetic modifications might be needed to allow human populations to live in locations other than Earth. Suggestions include adding genes from Dinocos, how do you pronounce that? Dinococcus rhodioduranus, a bacterium that can survive in high levels of radiation, and adding genes from a variety of organisms to enable humans to synthesize all 20 amino acids. Humans normally synthesize only 11 and extract the remaining from nine from food. So talking about engineering, altering the human genome, altering the human DNA, the human body, the genetic, like manipulating the body to adapt to what they want it for. Now, yes, you could argue that's, we're going to space and check, or we need better soldiers, or whatever they decide, which is almost always where that ends up leaning. They always love to sell you on the idea of the better, solving disease and helping people. And even if they intend that, that's not the real focus for people who invest in this stuff. Usually not. And I say that because you can look back and realize where it invested and what they focused on. Look at the outcome. People like John Rappaport has been telling you his entire career how many patents and technologies that they've created that could benefit humans and society, and in ways that don't benefit the government, that get shelved and nobody talks about it. And then they sell you on things they claim are going to meet those purposes that never seem to materialize or hurt you instead. In this, it says design set of genetic changes to give non-human traits to humans, e.g. ability to survive in space, infrared vision. Now, that may sound super cool, but it's crazy and would alter the human species. But on top of that, ways that could be done, things that could be done to make it bad for you. Remove vision, hurts your influence. This is the point. It goes both ways. And you wouldn't even know what happened. It says, quote, human performance enhancement, or HPE, could help military service and intelligence analysts through the use of multiple technologies to connect technology to human beings. That's transhumanism. That's a part of the conversation we're having. Now, it says examples of gene editing applications given in the report that could aid in extended human spaceflight, or whatever else we're talking about, include, and this is insane, adding reptilian genes that provide the ability to see in infrared, fostering specific physical attributes, ability to cope with low oxygen levels that could aid warfighters, of course, increasing muscle mass in disease-free humans, adding genes from the term there, the Dinococus radiodurans. How do you actually pronounce that? Radiodurans, however it is, a bacterium that can survive in high levels of radiation, and adding genes from a variety of organisms to enable humans to synthesize all 20 amino acids. Genetic editing, according to the RAND report, that has the potential to make humans stronger, more intelligent, or more adapted to extreme environments. And of course, for the haves, right? The have-nots don't get that. You end up living in the non-genetically altered, slums where you're not better than everybody and have, this is where the world inevitably goes. If you open this door and make it to average people, the rich will end up making themselves or their children, right, just healthier, stronger, and this has been written about. If this becomes normalized, it will inevitably create a division between the people who continue to use it and grow better and stronger and fast, and those that don't. That's a basic, anybody can understand that. It says provide new capabilities, infrared applications with potential implications for military intelligence operations. The word human, interestingly enough, was only mentioned 3 times in the entire description of DARPA Geo. This video shows how scientists can control the behavior of cells simply by switching on a light. Now realize, guys, your body's made up of cells. It's not too hard to recognize that this could be used to manipulate you as a person, but specifically targeted could manipulate certain cells. And this is where the Rockefeller study point comes in. We'll get to that in a minute about this, but that's talking about magnetogenetics, but it does discuss the same research using optogenetics, and we'll go into that in a second. But it's simply using that to create a surge or a decline in insulin levels. Literally something that could kill you very easily. So that's just one example, which they've already studied. So here is, we were talking about this one. This is from 2024. And there's plenty of these out there, but I just want to give you a starting point for those that want to research more and understand the connection. This is a study from 2024. This is National Library of Medicine. It says optogenetics and targeted gene therapy. This one's for retinal diseases, but you see, it can be applied to damn near anything. We're talking optogenetics and then targeted gene therapy to whatever they want to target. And it's obvious the possibilities there. 2022. Showing you that this continues to go back. Optogenetic controlled immunotherapeutic designer cells for post-surgical cancer immunotherapy. This one's 2021. Optogenetics and mRNA vaccines. And this is sort of an award discussion about it, but this has been worked on and talked about for a long time. Here is a one from 2020. Optogenetics. We may soon be able to manipulate the mind with light. Just really putting a fine point on it, right? The reality of the broad scope, or I guess more of a broad point, that this is something that could be used to manipulate you in the way you think, the way you feel, the way you act. Now, before we go into those studies, which most of you have probably seen, I want to reiterate some points from this article that it just stand out again. And we've done this once before about different parts of this article, but it's obvious that at least to me, that this is one part of the same conversation. When we get into the neuroscience element of it and how it's being used to affect the way you think or feel or act. Now, this is Whitney's article written for TLAV from May 4th, 2020. Coronavirus gives a dangerous boost to Darpa's darkest agenda. So bringing it full circle to the point of the people involved with COVID-19, what they did, the experiments they were conducting, and the idea that Darpa's technology, which is interconnected with the same people we talked about, got as she said, a dangerous boost, exploded under Trump and Biden in that conversation. So now that DARPA is rushing forward in the same direction, it's important to recognize what really did explode in that and what it meant, right? So we talked about the in vivo nano platforms, right? That's one large part of this. That's the idea of creating a platform in your body that can create what they want being triggered from the outside. That's kind of the same point, really, but there's a lot to read in all of this. But that's one important beginning stage, I would argue. Living foundries. Now it says, through living foundries, DARPA is transforming synthetic biomanufacturing into a predictable engineering practice supportive of a broad range of national security objectives. That's their quote. I still don't understand I mean, I do, but it shouldn't make sense for national security if you're talking about medically helping people, unless you clearly understand that there's a military purpose for this. And I mean, that could only mean terrifying things as far as I can see. It says the types of research this Living Foundries program supports, remember, this is written in 2020 and goes back before that, involves the creation of artificial life, including the creation of artificial genetic material, including artificial chromosomes, the creation of entirely new organisms, and using artificial genetic material to, quote, add new capacities to human beings, i.e., genetically modifying humans through the insertion of synthetically created genetic material. See, this point, we're talking about possibly injecting, genetically altered viruses or that's the stage. But we're talking today about the same outcome, but using optogenetics or other versions we'll get into. DARPA is known to be involved in research where these methods are used to create super soldiers that no longer require sleep or regular meals. Among the augmented features, and has another program about creating metabolically dominant fighters, is what they call it. Reports on these programs also discuss the other very disconcerting use of these same technologies, quote, genetic weapons that would subvert DNA and, quote, undermine people's minds and bodies. Those are direct quotes from what DARPA was aiming to do with this research, which this to me is simply an extension of the same goal. So if we know that, and what we just read seems to be an obvious connection to that very clear point. Now it says, however, these genetic kill switches could also be inserted into actual humans through artificial chromosomes, which just as they have the potential to extend life, also have the potential to cut it short. That's what I'm talking about. Everything they do, it's dual use at this point. And actually, that makes me remember an article where I really get into that. Try to grab it in a second. Let's see if it pops up. But it says, notably, it was revealed in 2017 that DARPA had invested $100 million in gene drive research, which involves the use of genetic modification to wipe out entire populations, explaining why it often referred to as a genetic extinction technology. Now, these kind of things in general, this is overlap with the Insect Allies point and all this stuff. I don't know why this has ever even been allowed, but I think post COVID-19 and gain of function, it really did open this door to some of the darker things happening. Now it says, in addition, other DARPA experiments involve the use of genetically modified viruses. That's the COVID-19 overlap. That insert genetic material into human cells, specifically neurons in the brain, in order to tweak human brain chemistry. In one example, DARPA-funded research has altered human brain cells to produce two new proteins. The first allowing neural activity to be easily detected by external devices, and the second allowing magnetic nanoparticles to induce an image or sound in the patient's mind. Now that's magnetogenetics, excuse me. Now, this again is not the same as optogenetics, but we're going to get into why I think I'm sure you could already see why these seem to overlap. But my mindset is that this is what was an earlier stage of something they're currently driving into. But it's the aim that I'm getting at. Now it says changing human brain chemistry and functionality at the cellular level is only one of numerous DARPA initiatives aimed at changing how human beings think and perceive reality. So when you realize that seems to be their focal point through most of these agendas, as they'll ultimately discuss, that's why I've been so concerned about where this goes. Since 2002, DARPA has acknowledged its efforts to create a brain-machine interface. Though first aimed at creating a wireless brain modem, for a freely moving rat, which would allow the animal's movements to be remotely controlled, DARPA isn't shy about the eventual goal of applying such brain enhancement to humans in order to enable soldiers to, quote, communicate by thought alone. These are all direct quotes from DARPA's research. And the links are all behind the yellow. It's all included. Or remotely control human beings on the enemy side only, so they say, for purposes of war. I mean, think about how insane that is. So they're openly admitting that they want to and can, or they claim they're achieving the ability to do that. But we're going to pretend that they totally wouldn't do that against enemies they perceive here, or people they don't perceive as, maybe they perceive as all as enemies, or just whoever they want to manipulate. It says the project, which has advanced greatly in recent years, has long raised major concerns among prominent defense scientists, some of whom warned in a 2008 report that, quote, remote guidance or control of a human being could quickly backfire were an adversary to gain access to the implanted technology. I mean, that's, of course, should an enemy do that, or that just be the point of what you're doing, right? Because you're doing that already. Why would the concern be that you're already being influenced by the DARPA, manipulation? But that goes back to the hacking point, right? And it says opening the possibility of hacking a person's brain. And they also raise concerns about the general ethical perils of such technologies. Now, just the hack point alone. Let's say they have no intentions or even the capability of doing what I'm worried about. Well, people out there have the ability to hack, and this is opening your brain to that in different ways, depending on the technology, that possibility. Now, it says in 2015, Michael Goldblatt, then director of DARPA's Defense Science Offices, or DSO, which oversees most aspects of the agency's Super Soldier program, told journalist Annie Jacobson that he saw no difference between, quote, having a chip in your brain that could help control your thoughts and a cochlear implant that helps the deaf hear. That's the whole moral bio. They're like, yeah, it's the same thing for me. It's technology. Well, one is manipulating the way you think and feel and act, and one is helping you hear. Now, it says, when pressed about the unintended consequences of such technology, Goldblatt stated, quote, there are unintended consequences for everything. Yeah. So why we should have an say on whether you do this to people without their knowledge. Now, it says, thus, it is worth pointing out that while DARPA developed technologies from human genetic engineering to the brain-machine interfaces are often first promoted as something that will revolutionize and improve human health. DARPA sees the use of these technologies for such ends as being on the same footing as other dystopian and frankly nightmarish applications, like thought control. Brain-machine interfaces are no exception. Having first been promoted as a way to boost bodily functions of veterans with neural damage or post-traumatic stress disorder, which is caused by what they're doing anyway, the government and what they're doing to these people are forcing them to do, and to allow amputees to control advanced prosthetics. Same point of Elon Musk. While these do indeed represent major medical advances, DARPA's leadership has made it clear that they see no distinction between the medical use of brain-machine interface and using them to exert total control over a human being by guiding their thoughts and even their movements. Such stark admission from DARPA's leadership makes it worth exploring the state of these current brain-machine interface programs, as well as their explicit goals. For instance, one of the goals of DARPA's next generation non-surgical neurotechnology, which they call their N3 program, James Giordano has talked about this, involves using non-invasive or minimally invasive brain-computer interfaces. That is optogenetics. That's magnetogenetics in one form where there's earlier versions that are connected, but that's what we're talking about today. Something that can be done from a distance. That's debatable what that distance is. And on top of that, the point is that you can be around devices that can trigger you using whatever pulses they're trying to use. It's it's weird. There's a movie, I think it's called Serenity, where there's sort of that point in the movie where the woman and the main character, sort of, or one of them, is triggered by something they play through the TV, and she ends up reacting and turns into like a universal soldier. It's exactly what we're talking about. I mean, it's what they're discussing, guys. And it says in interfaces to read and write directly onto the brain using those interfaces from optogenetics. Now, what they're discussing here, they just call it non-invasive, right? That's the point. And maybe at this point they hadn't achieved that. Maybe they had and they didn't want to tell you. Now this is what DARPA's openly discussing. According to one recent report on DARPA's N3 program, one example of minimally invasive technologies would involve, and this is perfect because it overlaps with COVID-19 in the earlier stage, one version of their minimally invasive neuromanipulative thing would be, I don't know, an injection of a virus carrying light-sensitive sensors or other chemical, biotech, or self-assembling nanobots that could reach individual neurons and control their activity independently without damaging sensitive tissue. The proposed use for these technologies isn't yet well specified, but as animal experiments have shown, controlling the activity of single neurons at multiple points is sufficient to program artificial memories of fear, desire, and experiences directly into the brain. The injection of a virus, right? Like a genetically altered virus, like COVID-19 shots, or who's to say whether that's what this did or was or even capable of. But that's the point. So had somebody wanted to use the thing we're discussing as a vector for this, they could have. Simple. And we know that there was experimentation going on. This may sound just lunacy to some people who have yet to accept what that really was, despite how much evidence there is to prove it. And this is now we're talking about light pulses. It says official military documents have openly stated that the Pentagon's ultimate goal is to essentially replace human fighters with self-aware, interconnected robots who will both design and conduct operations against targets chosen by artificial intelligence systems. So your automatons. I think that was it. Just kind of on the nose, isn't it? Oh, that's right. I swear that was in there. Anyway, I'll come back to it. Maybe it was one word. I don't think I did that. Anyway, I'll just come back to it. The point was dual use. I put up an article, a show about that exact point. But let's talk about the overlap to magnetogenetics. Now, this has been discussed for a long time as well. Now, the reason I think this is important is because both can be used from outside forces. You can create a magnetic field using all sorts of things that aren't necessarily like using a magnet right in front of you, right? Say more so with light pulses. But the weird overlap that was the discussion, remember the whole thing of the magnets during COVID-19, which is still regarded as ridiculous conspiracy theory. Maybe it was. Maybe the whole point was to cast doubt on what was going to happen in the future. But there was things that you couldn't dismiss from that. Like nurses and people that could prove there was something weird happening there. Now, maybe that was something that you could explain with something else. Or maybe it was something that was being tested. All I ask is that people consider these openings, because whether you think that was something or not, this is real. So it's the same of the sort of the point of like graphene oxide. There's people in the conversation today at the high levels of the conversation who think that doesn't even exist, because it got so ridiculously covered that it was treated as fake news everywhere, even though you could prove they've been discussing graphene. I mean, look, I can just search it really quickly, and I'm sure one of them will pop up. That's the first one. Look at this. Functionalized graphene oxide serves as novel vaccine nanoadjuvant for a robust simulation of right there. It's not a conspiracy theory. And this is from, where's the date? 2016. It goes back a long way. Today, you're talking about using graphene oxide to, use like a nanotech overlap to like monitor, like put in the water to regulate water levels, nature I mean, it's insane. Not even getting into the very obvious health concerns, but it's more about the weird technological advances they're using to do all sorts of things that we don't want. The point, though, is that during the conversation, it was a concern, right? And then ultimately it was ended up proven that in their own Pfizer documentation, you could prove they used graphene oxide in the testing process. That was admitted to, and that there was admitted to be a small residual overlap, but it was nothing that they said you're concerned about. Maybe that was the case. So the argument that it wasn't involved or wasn't in the show, that's false. That was proved, but it was 0.001%. The point is, people like Stu Peters came out and said it was 99% of the shot, and that's dumb. Wasn't? That's ridiculous. But that got people to ignore the obvious connection. Now, maybe it wasn't even involved, and that was a random test that had nothing to do with anything, but my point is that it is being used for very concerning ways, but now it's not even allowed to be discussed because people act like it's fake. So that's kind of what I think some of this stuff is. Magnets in COVID-19 is to kind of keep you away from this, or at the very least, it was something they were doing, and that was the story meant to keep you from acknowledging it. But here is a study from 2011, or a conversation. Can magnetism help us control the brain remotely? Answer is yes. We'll go through it. I'll include this one about graphene oxide. This will be at the bottom. Here is an article from Pharma's Almanac, Optogenetics and the Future of Remote Biological Control. Just not familiar with the platform, but I thought it was interesting what they wrote about it. And this is, there it is. One part, he goes over some pretty good information, and it's very well done. And it starts with the earlier examples of magnetogenetics into 2015. It talks about what happened in the different phases. This was the breakthroughs from 2015, 2017. Then he gets into the recent breakthroughs and new methodologies from 2022, 2024. And I believe this was written 2025 March. He does then go on to some of the, future stuff, but this, what I want you to focus on here is what he writes about the breakthrough new methodologies. It says one of the most notable breakthroughs came with the integration of what's called Piezo 1 mechanosensitive ion channels and magnetic nano devices for CRISPR-based gene editing. Shin and colleagues, discussed above in regard to the research, 2022, demonstrated that magnetic torque forces could be used to activate Piezo 1 channels, leading to controlled calcium influx and subsequent activation of CRISPR-based gene editing machinery. Okay, so we're talking about something that's been put into your body, CRISPR-based gene editing machinery. And then using magnetogenetics, you could manipulate the calcium influx, which would subsequently activate that based machinery, if I'm understanding this correctly. And so this is that would be something that you'd be primed with, and then this would be something that could be done by anything that would be used to magnetically affect that result. That that have to be created to do that, though, right? But it seems insane to me with what we're discussing. And it says this work introduced a new paradigm for magnetogenetics, where external magnetic fields could be used not only to trigger cellular signaling, but also to drive precise genetic modifications. By combining mechanical force transductions with gene editing, this approach offers an innovative method for remotely controlling cellular function with unprecedented precision. So whether you think this can be used to affect the way you think and feel or actually move, it's very clear that what they're always discussing is that they could use this to create something in your body. Like I said, to cellular change, so you could all of a sudden have a spike in insulin or a drop or any number of other things you could discuss. It's affecting cellular function with unprecedented precision. So it's obvious this could be abused no matter how you look. My point is to take it to where I see it aiming, maybe already at, which is like the mass scale kind of manipulation. Another major development in this period involved advancements in magnetomechanical control of biological processes. Precisely tuned magnetic forces demonstrated the ability, I think, to regulate cellular activities, including mechanotransduction pathways that influence gene expression and cell fate decisions. This work provided deeper insights into how mechanical forces generated by magnetic fields could be leveraged to manipulate biological systems beyond traditional biochemical and electrical methods. So beyond what we're capable of. The ability to fine-tune magnetomechanical interactions holds great potential for regenerative medicine, where controlled mechanical stimulation can guide stem cell differentiation and tissue formation. So it's essentially the same point. But that's what I'm trying to say is these are basically different forms of achieving the same, to some degree, the same outcome. This research suggests that magnetogenetics could eventually complement or even replace traditional pharmacological approaches in certain contexts, meaning pharmaceuticals, pills. So if you're taking using these kind of outside manipulations cause what you would otherwise do by taking some kind of pharmaceutical. That's exactly my concern. Think of anything. Think of something that pacifies you. Think of something that, antipsychotics. Think of something, any number of things. All it is talking about is using these things. Now, I can't speak to the scientific possibility of them producing every single possible outcome. The point is what they're discussing is using this to achieve a cell manipulation that would replace traditional pharmacological approaches. That's exactly what he wrote. It says the rapid evolution of magnetogenetics has positioned it as a powerful tool for remote control of biological systems. I can't make that any more clear. Why that's allowed or concerning is beyond me, or why it's not concerning to people is beyond me. Now, under the future part, another exciting frontier, he writes, is the integration of magnetogenetics with other emerging technologies. Now, my thought would be like that maybe both of the things at the same time. Maybe that would be counterintuitive. I'm not sure. But he goes on to say, particularly optogenetics. I mean, that's what he writes. But when I think this out, how it's worth considering that they could be applied in different ways. But what I was thinking about earlier, it would just, double the effect. I don't know. Maybe it's beyond my comprehension. But at the end of the day, he's telling you right now that what they're discussing with Darpa and their new program could be used alongside the magnetogenetics they've been working on and achieving the same thing. And that is concerning with what we're hearing and what we can see this already being used for, or the possible overlap with COVID. So another exciting frontier is emerging with other technologies, particularly optogenetics, synthetic biology, and digital medicine. All of these things are what's currently screaming forward with Trump, Maha, RFK Jr., Larry Ellison, OpenAI, SoftBank. That's all of what they're doing. It's exactly what they're doing. Combining magnetogenetics with optogenetics could enable hybrid systems that take advantage of the high temporal precision of optical control and the deep tissue penetration of magnetic fields. Similarly, incorporating synthetic biology approaches may allow for the engineering of highly specialized magnetoreceptive proteins, tailored for different cellular applications. In the context of digital medicine, magnetogenetic systems could potentially be paired with bioelectric devices for real-time wireless control of biological activity, opening the door for next-generation smart therapeutics. Well, we've heard a lot about that, haven't we? RFK Jr. wants everyone to wear wearables. Maybe that's the first step. Continues on, magnetomechanical control over gene editing machinery suggests that magnetogenetic could eventually enable high-precision gene therapy. So it's the same point, allowing for external control over CRISPR-based interventions without the need for chemical inducers or viral vectors. So no longer do you need the shot to give you the things needed to, do what they want to do in your body. They can do it using magnets and light. At least, or that's the future they're aiming at. But I think my point is that they're showing you that they're doing this right now. And just when we get into the next articles, it's very clear. Over the past decade, magnetogenetics has emerged as a groundbreaking approach for remotely controlling cellular activity using magnetic fields. What began as an exploration of bioelectric bioelectromagnetics and natural magnetoreception has evolved into a sophisticated field that integrates nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and magnogenetics. It's exactly what we're talking about. It's a good article. I have to follow this platform. So, 2021, evaluating methods and protocols of ferritin-based magnetogenetics. Now, I think it's important to consider this overlap because of what it means, especially when both are potentially being applied. For the most obvious example I've seen of literally controlling, motion, function, possibly thoughts and feelings. And that's not my opinion. That's what's being discussed. So this is 2021. Here's one from 2021 as well, from March. Efficacy of a broadly neutralizing SARS-CoV-2 ferritin nanoparticle vaccine. Just overlap this with so over here, we're talking about scientific studies to use ferritin nanoparticles to, manipulate the body, which we're going to get into next. But at the same exact time, here's the same thing to fight COVID-19. Funny how that just a panacea. It works wherever they want it to, right? Or maybe not. Here, and let's not forget that we'll come back to again, the fact that the current administration or Biden's are still leaning into these shots, which are killing people. So what's in it? What's going on? What's the intention here? It doesn't make much sense when you think about what Trump's base wants from him. Okay. The Rockefeller University, and I've showed this many times. I thought it was worth actually going through some of these points again to understand why I think this is so concerning today. This is from 2017. Flipping a switch inside the head. With new technology, scientists are able to exert wireless control over brain cells of mice with just the push of a button. Now, the simplest point, and it really does get specific both in this one and the Guardian article about actual controlling motion. But if you're really being clear about this, controlling brain cells in a large would ultimately be able to do most everything. Now it says, of course, I love the way they start with this, even though it's actually what they're doing. It says, ready your tinfoil hats. Mind control is not far. Why would you start like that if your point is it's real? It's like it's meant to sort of like undermine. I don't know. I just think it's a funny way to frame it because, I mean, in a way, it's sort of signaling to you that maybe you shouldn't doubt all the things they call fake news and conspiracy theory. God forbid you start asking questions about the things and how many of them have been proven to be correct. But it says mind control is not as far-fetched an idea as it may seem. In Jeffrey M. Friedman's laboratory, it happens all the time, though the subjects are mice, not people. Friedman and his colleagues have demonstrated a radio-operated, now there's the overlap, the optogenetics, and I think it's radiogenetics, we'll get to this, are very similar. We'll get into it. It's the same kind of conversation. And it says, his colleagues have demonstrated a radio-operated remote control for the appetite and glucose metabolism of mice, a sophisticated technique to wirelessly alter neurons in the animal's brains. You're an animal, by the way. At the flick of a switch, they are able to make mice hungry or suppress their appetite while the mice go about their lives normally. Now, in the face of that, right? So you could be convinced that you're not hungry and starve to death. Eventually, I mean, if you can convince your brain that you don't need it, I mean, the point is it goes well beyond that. If you can do that, you can spike the levels to the point to where you could die instantly. And that's what they'll even argue in these other conversations around this, is that that's one of those points from the scientists who talk about these things and say that could be used as a weapon. It was discussed way back then. It's the same point now. Although there are other ways to deliver signals to neurons, each has its limitations. It says in deep brain stimulation, for example, scientists thread a wire through the brain to place an electrode next to the target cells. But the implant can damage nearby cells and tissues in ways that interfere with normal behavior. Optogenetics, which works similarly but uses fiber optics and a pulse of light rather than electricity. Now, not today. Again, today they're at a point where this can be done without any wire connection. It says a third strategy, but the optogenetics has the same issue, they say. A third strategy, using drugs to activate genetically modified cells bred into mice or injected, or in regards to genetically modified cells can be done through injection, is less invasive, but drugs are slow to take effect and wear off. So maybe that's what they've struggled through COVID-19. Oh, it's all wearing off and it's not sticking around. So clearly there was something I think that was being done. The solution that Friedman's group hit on, referred to as radiogenetics I think earlier I said it was same. It's magnogenetics and radiogenetics are very similar. Opto is the newer direction I think that is now being done in the same way. What they're arguing here is that magnetogenetics and radiogenetics can be done without connection. The point is that that's now where the optogenetics part has gone to and maybe always was. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to show you. But it says the solution that the group hit upon was as radiogenetics or magnetogenetics avoids these problems. With their method published last year in Nature, biologists can turn neurons on or off in a live animal at will, quickly, repeatedly, and without implants by engineering the cells to make them receptive to radio waves or a magnetic field. So without connection, so remotely. We've combined molecules already used in cells for other purposes in a manner that allows an invisible force to take control of an instinct as primal as hunger. It's an alarming way to frame that. So that if be done to a mouse, it could be done to you. Maybe it already has been. All delivered and installed by a genetically engineered virus. The remote control for this contraption is a modified welding tool, though a store-bought magnet also works. So yes, that's what was being done then, right? What was it again? 2017. So when COVID-19 first happened, I went, oh my God, look at this, right? So they're talking about using a genetically engineered virus, which is what those things were. They, and using that as a vector to deliver what they want. In this case, something that could then be manipulated from outside using magnetic forces. Is that really even that hard to wrap your mind around with moral bioenhancement and the many different times our government's tested on us that might have been something that was being done in one part of a large multifaceted experimentation and with the magnet overlap? I mean, it's something we really need to consider. At this point, I don't know how we ever prove that without whistleblowers or more, but hopefully something more comes out. But we know they're capable of that and we know the technology is there. So it's really a moot point now is just to recognize that it is being done. It says the researchers' first challenge was to find something in a neuron that could serve as an antenna to detect the incoming radio signal or magnetic field. The logical choice was ferritin, a protein that stores iron in cells in a balloon-like particles just a dozen nanometers wide. Each ferritin particle carries within it thousands of grains of iron that wiggle around in response to a radio signal and shift and align when immersed in a magnetic field. We all have these particles shimmying around inside of our brain cells, but these motions normally have no effect on neurons. Right? So this is something inherently, the idea that they could take something that's already natural in your body and use this to manipulate you in certain ways is pretty alarming. Even more so if they were to add more of them. And so now we're talking about the ferritin nanoparticle shots. Well, okay, so now and again, this is where we're going to get into what they're discussing here is using this not as a vaccine, but just a shot that manipulate, they inject, that adds, I think, more as well as some of the other parts we discussed, that ends up then manipulating your body using magnetic fields. As the article literally entitled, Genetically Engineered Magnetoprotein, that's ferritin, remotely controls brain and behavior. And then just apparently in a completely different conversation, nothing to do, not connected, here's a ferritin COVID shot. It's all safe and effective. I'm sure you can piece together that's very clear how that can be used in the same exact way. So it says, Friedman's team realized that they could use a genetically engineered virus to create doorways into a neuron's outer membrane. If they could then somehow attach each door to a ferritin particle, they reasoned, they might be able to wiggle the ferritin enough to jostle the door open. And this is what they claim they've done. The group modified glucose-sensing neurons, cells that are believed to monitor blood sugar levels in the brain and keep them within normal range, to put them under wireless control. To accomplish this, they inserted what they call the TRPV1 and ferritin genes into a virus and using yet another genetic trick, injected them into the glucose-sensing neurons. Now, one of the things we talked about with this and Charles Lieber's work is that he literally discovered the how to ultimately do this. It says this innovation was important when he talks about when his team coated the hairpin nanowire with a fatty lipid layer, like a lipid nanoparticle. It says the device was easily pulled into the cell via membrane fusion, a process related to one cell used to engulf viruses and bacteria. It's important, he says, because it indicates that when a man-made structure is as small as a virus or bacteria, it can behave the way biological structures do. You cannot miss how this stuff is stepping stones to what we're dealing with right now. So they worked this out on how to make that work using that groundbreaking technology. And so now they've inserted this TRPV1 and ferritin genes into a virus and then using another trick injected them into glucose-sensing neurons. Right? So that's my point. So those two things were needed to make this happen. Now, I argue it's probably possible with just using natural ferritin in your body to do something, but they need that inserted part with the virus as well as the ferritin, and then outside control is all you need. You could very well be considering that right now that people are just primed and waiting for that outside control. I'm really not trying to alarm anybody, but these are very real and obvious possible connections. I mean, it wouldn't be doing you a service if I just pretended those weren't obviously right there. I'm not saying that what I can prove is happening in regard to the people, but the technology is there. We know what they've done before. It's the same point. It says once the virus had enough time to infect and transform the target neurons, the researchers switched on the radio transmitter, turned to 465 hertz, kilohertz, a little below the band used for AM radio. So clearly they don't really need that much power, guys. And if it's they could use this through anything. That's the point of the radio or optogenetics through your phone, TV. The neurons responded. They began to fire, signaling a shortage of glucose, even though the animal's blood sugar levels were normal. And other parts of the body responded just as they would to a real drop in the blood sugar. Insulin fell. Actually fell. So the body's been tricked to think that glucose levels were shorting, even though they're normal. And because of that, the insulin levels drop. So you could kill somebody like that very easily. And if you continue to do that, somebody would die. It says the liver started pumping out more glucose and the animal started eating more. In effect, we created a perceptual illusion that the animal had low blood glucose, even though the levels were normal. Inspired by these results, the researchers wondered if magnetism, like radio waves, might trigger ferritin to open the cellular doors. It did. When the team put the mice cages close to an MRI machine or waved a rare earth magnet over the animals, their glucose sensing neurons were triggered. So think about that. So they're doing this over here using radiogenetics. And they set up with that. Then they just tried it with magnet, and apparently it worked. I mean, think about that. It's so far beyond what most of us can even grasp. But I mean, I'm not in any way pretending like I understand the technological background, the scientific, but what they're talking about is something that is like almost as if they could prime people with this, and then there's just other ways going forward that you could be doing something completely unrelated and have it trigger something you don't want. It's pretty crazy. Now, again, to be real, we're talking about something that they're claiming they're working on, but all the different studies are there, and we know this is stuff they're testing. I'm just trying to get ahead of this and warn people that this is something that will be abused. It always is, and I'm concerned about that, let alone whether or not it's already being applied. It says stimulating appetite is one thing. Could they also suppress it? The group tweaked the TPRV1 gene so it would pass chloride, which acts to inhibit neurons. Now, when they inserted the modified TRPV1 into the neurons, the rush of chloride made the neurons behave as if the blood was overloaded with glucose. See, dual use. Insulin production surged in the animal and they ate less. This seems to indicate clearly the brain as well as the pancreas is involved in glucose regulation. It says, potentially, it would be less invasive to inject a crippled virus into the same spot of the brain and let it permanently modify the cells there, making them responsive to wireless control. In theory, it might also be possible to make a patient's own cells receptive to electromagnetic waves by removing them from the body, then delivering TRPV1 and ferritin into the removed part, and then putting the cells back in the body. Interestingly, it says this would be a protocol not unlike those currently used in stem cell treatments and some cancer immunotherapies, in which patients' own cells are engineered and then reimplanted back in their bodies. Just wild. Now, a couple parts from this. 7 years old. This is 2016. It says, in one final experiment, again, the title for the podcast was Genetically Engineered Magneto Protein Remotely Controls Brain and Behavior. Now, it says, in one final experiment, the researchers injected this magneto protein into the stratium of freely behaving mice, a deep brain structure containing dopamine-producing neurons that are involved in reward and motivation, and then placed the animals into an apparatus split into magnetized and non-magnetized sections. This shows that magneto can remotely control the firing neurons deep within the brain and also control complex behaviors. It's just clear as day. Previous attempts using magnets to control neuron activity needed multiple components for the system to work. That's what we're talking about, right? Injecting magnetic particles, injecting a virus that expresses a heat-sensitive channel, or head fixed the animal so that a coil could induce changes in magnetism. I think that's the implant. The problem with having a multi-component system is that there's so much room for each individual piece to break down. Magnetogenetics is therefore an important addition to neuroscientists' toolbox, which will undoubtedly be developed further and provide researchers with new ways of studying brain development and function. Yeah, because that's clearly all they're working on. 2017. Here we are. So the overlap for me, like I said before, here's an article, a study. The date, where is it again? 2021. The field of neurogenetics, where it stands and where it's going. So these things are it's not hard to see how they overlap, guys. So if we're talking about the neuro manipulation, as it says, the field of neurogenics lies at the intersection of neuroscience and genetics, right? Neuroscience, neuroweapons. That's what we're talking about. Now, neuroscience is a broad field, but my point is that is within that. And we're talking about genetics in the sense of using optogenetics, magnetogenetics to manipulate and, basically, if in one part, genetically manipulate the body. So if we're talking about where they intersect with what we just discussed from the N3 program, it very much concerns me that these things are going to be applied in a way well beyond some helping people use their arms again and the narratives that we get. I'll include this article, Biodigital Convergence, COVID magnetogenetic ferritin vaccines. And the one I discussed, Bob Langer, the coronavirus common denominator, tied to Charles Lieber. And the one I pointed to here from Charles Lieber's work. And again, for those that don't recognize the fact that the COVID shots are literally still being used and put out, and Trump still supports them, it's an anomaly to me. I'll include this, by the way. John Boutine Sr. put this out just to show you this is still happening. This is another point he made about 18,000 dead in regard to specifically kidney deaths, and just showing you the spike. I mean, you guys don't need to know that. I mean, no, you know this already. All of you watching the show most likely are very aware of exactly what that is. COVID-19 shots were given, and we saw an explosion of just about everything possible you could imagine. And that's not the point. Is genetically manipulating or genetic manipulation in many ways causes different things to happen to different people. The overlap was obvious. The point forward from the COVID shot administration, we've never really come back from excess death and all these problems. He says, how can they just ignore 18,000 kidney deaths in one state? One. Well, because they want to. That's why. Donald Trump and RFK claim to care, and at the very least, whether they do or not, aren't doing anything about it. And on top of that, and this is what I get most concerned about, if we are genuinely concerned about the COVID-19 overlap with these kind of technological manipulations, Trump admin leans into self-amplifying shots. And so you have more than just my article. Here's one of them. Self-amplifying. Arcturus was the company that RFK specifically named as not stopping. Self-amplifying mRNA COVID-19 vaccine demonstrates a superior immune response compared with mRNA. Self-amplifying. So, meaning that it continues to produce the spike protein, it continues to spread. That's alarming, especially with what we just talked about and how that could then be used and overlapped, and very worrisome to me. So let's continue to a few overlapping points, and then we'll end with the geoengineering point. Now, what we just discussed, including the larger points we made from last show and the larger just technocratic conversation. What the 6G addition to all of this, if we're talking about, any of the things we discussed, whether it's the signals, magnetogenetics, optogenetics, radiogenetics, and the mass use, or any of the things we talk about in regard to needing more, like we talked about 7Cs, for example. The larger meshing and the conversation of what they might need to achieve the technological aims they're talking about, 6G meets those ends. Now, yes, I made the point last time. It's fair to point out that every time there's a new technological development, it's always, the TV is going to kill us all. It's not that crazy when you think about what it's actually done to us. But overall, there's usually a little bit of rational fear, right? I argue this is very different. This is not just about the new thing. This is about what we know and what the science shows this technology will open the door for. And that's all of the stuff we're talking about. And so Derek, this is Trump's post from 2019. I want 5G and even 6G in the United States as soon as possible. Well, I'll include Derek's article. Trump's FCC seeks to strip even more local control over 5G rollout, meaning that they're aiming to remove any level to states to stop and regulate what they're doing, which is just unconstitutional, but also insane. And so I think it's all part of whatever this all is growing toward, on top of the AI point. Also part of the same point, right? And 6G and AI are very interconnected. The point, though, is that the AI element is another angle of what they're using all of this for, or how it's going to expand. And as Adam wrote, Trump sells out the West to big AI. And of course, we already talked about this, signing protections to stop companies or protecting AI companies from state regulation, which is also unconstitutional and insane. But hashtag winning, though, right, guys? President Trump signed an executive order directing the federal government to sue states that enact AI regulations deemed harmful to U.S. AI global dominance. Okay, so I'd love to see that play out. I'd love to see how, in what world, an executive order could then be used to argue legally that you could sue a state for something that's constitutionally protected. But who knows? We're breaking down in other ways. Maybe this will, this is just ridiculous, guys. This is one of the worst. I don't think Trump is necessarily any worse or more alarming than any other president we've had. I think what he's doing is just really in your face and obvious, and this is the execution phase. But maybe, I do recognize that he is standout right now in more, I think it really is in my mind, because this is when this is supposed to happen. And maybe you can go back to the argument people made a long time ago that Trump was being put in place in order to bring everything down around him. Maybe we're still there. I just want you to really stand back and think about how clearly all of this has been continuing through multiple left and right administrations. And Trump really is in a like bombastically crazy way pushing this forward. And yet people pretend like it's all great. Nothing's happening. But, if you really look at what some of these other presidents did, at the end of the day, I think all of them were pretty much driving in the same direction. But here, as I said before, when Trump literally tells you about, this is actually worth playing again for this conversation. Because this is actually perfect. This really does bring together kind of the larger conversation. So you saw this clip, I'm sure. We played it in the last one. The point was Donald Trump talking about what 6G might do and saying something that sort of admits to you what we've always told you 5G and any of them were doing, even though even his administration in the past had told you this was conspiracy theory and that you were crazy for thinking any of this. But it's very real. So think about what we just talked about. Invasive optomagnetogenetics.
So we're into 6G now. I just 5G. I was a leader on 5G getting that done, and now they're up to 6.
Let's do it again.
What does that do? Give you a little bit deeper view into somebody's skin? See how perfect it is? I like the cameras the old days. So we're into 6G now. I just 5G. I was a leader on 5G getting that done. And now they're up to 6.
Let's do it again.
What does that do? Give you a little bit deeper view into somebody's skin? See how perfect it is? I like the cameras the old days. So they just had a nice feature. Now they cover every little. Let's see, Michael, you're in good shape. You're not gonna. But I tell you, it's the 6 is coming, huh?
So, a little deeper into the skin. I mean, the whole point, guys, is it's always been more than what they claimed it was. Now, we've talked about the way this started as military technology, as a weapon. And so now it's hard not to see that there is clearly, if not the only point, an overlap. But so what he's telling you is something that they pretend isn't real. And he acts like it's a joke, so people might dismiss it. But as I said in the post, this is the Great Reset. The whole thing, everything they're doing, this is where this is going. And Arnaud Bertrand also pointed out, in regard to the kind of an overlap, but I thought was relevant, the U.S. government now demanding 5 years of social media information from people coming in, but also DNA. And it shows you right in this. And listen, it's not just that. Listen to all the stuff they need. All social media accounts from the last 5 years, all of your biometrics, face, fingerprint, DNA. Why would they do DNA? Think about what we talked about today. All of your phone numbers from the last 5 years, email addresses from 10 years, IP addresses, metadata, names of your family, parents, spouse, siblings, children, all of your family members' phone numbers from the last 5 years. How do you even, who can even possibly do that? I don't know everybody's. I mean, that's crazy. People change their phone numbers. It's just, I think this is meant to be a barrier that's almost impossible to meet. Your family members' dates of birth. My point was the DNA stands out like crazy. Now, I'll include the conversation of where I think this is largely going, the idea of the funding mechanism from Pronomos Capital and the transition to a techno-feudal state. Because the reason I'm including this is just because the last conversation, the geoengineering part and the overlap and connection to Trump and Thiel and the rest of what's going on, despite it feeling like a left-wing operation, is important from the kind of playing God control mindset. And you're going to see what I mean. So I think this is possibly one element of reimagining this. I mean, everything. It's hard. It's hard not to see the fingerprints on all this. Now, like for example, Bill Gates. Everyone seems to have come to a reality, even ones that support him, like they can see at one point how clearly he was interconnected. And then he kind of pulled back a little bit, right? And then Trump's now meeting with him and their friends and everything's going great. And we love vaccines, right? It's just incredible how obvious it all is. But he kind of did take a back seat for a while. And still, he kind of, I think there's a reason for that. So, right. And same with Peter Thiel and Palantir. I think, even Alex Jones trying to walk you back and go, no, it's a small thing. It's lefties. No, he's wrong. He's lying or he's wrong. It's obvious that these things are getting too much attention. And so I guess what I'm saying here is the overlap to this is that this is clearly a larger ongoing agenda that is beginning to be seen more than it should, like the Prospero point, the network state cult discussion. But it really comes down to a larger kind of reimagining of everything. And my point was that Bill Gates was a driving force with that through the World Economic Forum. And now it's the same thing. Same agenda, same people, same direction with a different narrative and just hoping you don't connect those dots. So I believe this is, and as they called it, the engineered transition to tech Zionism was the term that was actually used to describe Prospero, which Roger Stone tells you is a freedom city they want to save because of the same funding for the freedom cities in the United States. But there's a lot more if you want to check out these discussions. This one was entitled, Trump and the Zionist globalist technocrats are building your new society, whether you like it or not. It's actually far more obvious than you may think if you haven't seen it before. Now, this, which we'll end with, is just such an incredibly alarming conversation, all kind of happening simultaneously, right? Here's this genetic manipulation and, dumping things in the skies and putting out dioxins and all these different things that are immersed, or rather we're immersed in. It's almost meant to be overwhelming. Like any one of these things could, end the human species. That's not a joke, by the way. Now, that's an extreme possible outcome. But this one is far closer to that than anything else. Well, it's hard to say. Genetic manipulation, gene therapy, or other gain of function, any one of these things obviously has that potential. This is entitled The Strange and Totally Real Plan to Blot Out the Sun and Reverse Global Warming. Now, we're not even going to get in, which we've talked about before many times, the absurdity of the current mainstream and even mostly mainstream alternative narrative, despite the right sort of, this is arguably carved out as the left climate change conversation. And I should say very clearly, I don't know many Republicans or frankly anybody that is smart enough to see through how dumb this argument is that there's a lot of lefties that believe that we're all going to die from climate change. My point though is that on the right side of the conversation, without either knowing it or choosing to look, they're supporting people who do support this. And whether that's because they see some kind of a technocratic societal control mechanism or because they believe that we're all going to die from climate change. It's interesting. Same kind of thing happens with Bill Gates and COVID-19 shots or BlackRock and Trump. You can't act like these guys are the most obvious lefty globalist deep state problems and then be like, yay, high-fiving with Trump because now we're unity party. It just makes you guys look ridiculous. And that's one of the reasons why so many people are waking up to how broken this all is. But this is really happening. And one, geoengineering has been very obviously proven since well before Brennan came out at the Council on Foreign Relations and just said it out loud, or before Harvard did an open program in stratospheric injection. It's been going on way before that. But even to this very day, people act like it's fake. That shows you the power of propaganda, guys. Put your tinfoil hat on. Well, we make a joke about that today anyway, because if you really understand what we're talking about, whether you're using aluminum foil or meshing or silver, these are things that actually block those signals. So it's crazy to look back and go, maybe they weren't that crazy. Or maybe they were, but they got it right. The point is there's so many real things happening around this that people just disregard because narrative. So, Politico. Good thing I highlighted it or screenshotted it. Now it says the intended effect to dim the light of the sun across the world and throw global warming into reverse. Oh, well, let me finish the first part. It was simply that, I went off on a tangent as usual. The understanding about this is that, I don't believe for a second, and I think it's very easily proven that the narrative they've spun together, which we'll get to at the end of this article, actually, about CO2, for example, or carbon. There are points to be made, but it is not even close to the way that they're making that argument out. And I don't believe for a second that we're, by carbon, which is necessary for human life, in any way hurting the planet the way they're claiming. We are destroying this planet in tons of ways, and that very conversation completely hides what they're actually doing with military burn pits and whatever else they're just doing, dioxins and glyphosate, and they don't care about your health. I think that's pretty obvious. But they want you to believe that by taking away the necessities of life, that somehow that's going to save the planet. Or weirdly, we need trees because it helps us survive, and then Bill Gates comes out and goes, cut them all down and save the planet. Which that's not a joke. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, unless there is more of a dark narrative behind it all. But when you come to what they're actually doing, there's a lot of conversations and, why people think they're doing it. Depopulation, there's a lot of different arguments. I just want people to understand that I really argue, if you really do look into this, James Corbett is somebody I highly recommend. It's very easy to understand. And maybe I'll just really quickly, they'll show you these arguments about, oh my God, look at the CO2 spike over the last 2,000 years or whatever they're claiming, right? But and then act like it's unprecedented, but it's literally not if you go back further. I don't know how you dispel that. I mean, don't make it into being something that is alarming when it's happened more than once. And this is of the last you look back, 4 before this were higher than what we're at now. And there's times when there weren't even humans walking the planet. It doesn't really make much sense. There are narratives and arguments they make about it. I just think it's obvious this is not what they claim. Now, maybe you disagree with me. It still doesn't change what I'm about to get into. I just want to make that clear for those that I'm not going to get into that argument about the reality of their narrative. But it is relevant, obviously, because if they're making it all up or lying about it, then this is even more alarming. But even if you believe this is what we're dealing with, what they're proposing can't be the solution, in my opinion. The intended effect, to dim the light of the sun across the world and throw global warming into reverse. The CEO wanted Pastor, a former senior United Nations climate official, to help. The company called itself Stardust Solutions, which, surprise, surprise, is completely run by former UN 8200 Israeli intelligence. Or no, excuse me, I take that back. Israeli nuclear scientists. It's not a joke. I don't see any that are directly connected to intelligence, but this is even more important, I think, and we'll get into it. But the same point. This company that's going to change the world, but it's all packed with people that work directly and tied directly to the Israeli government that's committing a genocide. Doesn't that seem a bit counterintuitive? But the idea of even simply blotting out the sun, like that's going to universally. What about places that don't have a lot of sun? Suddenly they don't have any ability to grow crops. I mean, the argument is at a core that we're all going to die if we don't do this. Therefore, that's acceptable. How in the world do you even converse about that? It's the same irrational mindset from COVID, right? If we don't do all this, we're going to die. So it's okay that we shun our old people into a corner and forget about them. It's okay that we let all people suffer in the corner or force things on people that are unconstitutional. It's what they do every time, and people fall for it. The Stardust CEO, Yanni Yedvab, was a nuclear physicist who was once deputy chief scientist at the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission, and he jumped straight to the point. It says, if the situation is as bad as it is, it's a big if, then we might actually need this technique. So the UN scientist they referenced in the beginning is somebody who ultimately tried to work along with Stardust Solutions, but the real point is he did so because he was worried about what they're doing and figured I might as well be involved. I might have highlighted some of this. He felt it necessary to be involved because of the worry and the risk, not necessarily because he supported them. Like, he made it clear that he ultimately wouldn't do this, but because of those worries, I'd rather be there watching and helping than not. But ultimately goes on to say, they were helpful. They listened to my points, but towards the end, it seems like he's pretty, concerned. But so if it's as bad as it is, we might need this technique. His point is that there's clear possible side effects, very clear negative outcomes. But if it's as bad as it is, then we might need to use it. You see, that's the logic every time. Strong rules, they write, would protect against several unpalatable but plausible scenarios. This is Pastor, the UN scientist said, or former, including one in which a billionaire, quote, a billionaire who has very strong relationship with the government, most likely the US government, might try it without any discussion or input from the global community. That's a little bit on the nose, isn't it? Now, whether it's Bill Gates, Peter Thiel, or anybody else, we all know where we're at. It says that was why Stardust's for-profit model was a matter of deep concern for Pastor. Right. So it is an Israeli government-influenced for-profit company that's going to potentially blot out the sun. What could go wrong? Yedvab and his team had conducted research and built the 25-person company with virtually no oversight. Yedvab was repeatedly emphasized, or he had repeatedly emphasized in interviews with us and on Stardust's website, that the company welcomes regulation and is taking steps to educate policymakers to that end. Yeah, clearly. We're showing government what to think and say. But currently, there is little that constrains it. Now, just very quickly, we're talking about spraying things into the sky. So we just went across the point of, so remember, we're talking about ejecting, nanomaterial or viral vectors to then be manipulated from the outside. Well, maybe that's already been done, or maybe that's something that could be simply sprayed over the top of you. That may sound crazy to some people, but again, it's the logical connection, which they've done before, Operation Sea Spray, in regard to a bacterial thing, or I think it was a viral thing. The point was today, if you did this and then ultimately relayed this through some other means, you could then use optogenetics to then effectively do the same thing. Just one of the possible things here. Or, hypothetically speaking, we could talk about a group like this, applying this in a way that could then be used to manipulate other people. Use it ways, certain areas, not others. Iran, by the way, for like over a decade, has accused Israel of using manipulation like this to affect the weather over their country. And are we still pretending like we don't know they can do that? It's very clear. I've talked about this many times. You have literally, I think it was South America, you've got companies that own car companies that use things that blow stuff into the sky that stop the rain from happening so it won't hurt their cars. There was an issue with these large hail pellets that were falling in a certain area of the world that were denting their cars. I did a whole story about this. So they use these massive things to pump this stuff in the sky that stops that from happening. And all of a sudden, people around the area are like, I can't grow crops anymore. Nobody cares. Like, that's a very small example. It's a big one, but it's a small, local version. They have been doing stuff like this forever. Clearly, they were kind of mashing together these two topics, but, there's different arguments to this about what could be done. My point is that I don't trust people who, any government overlap or anybody like this that would do, we shouldn't trust anybody, quite frankly. That's just smart. That doesn't mean dismiss everybody, but be questioning what you're looking at. But knowing they have connection to a government committing genocide right now, to a nuclear program they pretend doesn't even exist half the time, it seems a little bit weird. It says, in addition to the lack of binding international regulations, there were also no robust national standards governing solar geoengineering in Israel, where the company has its laboratory, or in the United States, where it was registered in Delaware. So again, guys, a company run by Israeli scientists operated in Israel, but somehow is registered in Delaware. Does that make sense to you? It should if you watch this show. I don't need to play the clip today. It's not relevant to the larger conversation, but understanding that we're talking about this is a company that's run by Israelis, worked out of Israel, and is apparently a U.S., this is how these things operate. And that should scream that there might be something else going on there. It says, that, of course, Delaware, the state that's home to a majority of the nation's top companies. Interesting. Stardust's legal ties to the U.S., four finance experts said, hinted at its intentions to court investors from Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and the U.S. government contracts. Pastors, here's my prediction. I get the sense that Trump's administration is going to make an agreement with them. And it'll be everyone's effort to try not to make it clear that Trump is now leaning into climate change. They won't make that the case. Or it'll be, there is a real problem, but not what the Democrats were doing. Some kind of new evolution, but it'll be the same thing. It'd be hard to believe, wouldn't it? But I see that building. And right now, they're right. You'll see more as we go through it. They're very much lined up with Trump's administration. They're projecting that that's going to happen. So we'll see. And it says Pastor, the former UN scientist, feared its early backers, which included a venture capital firm led in part by former Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and veterans of the Israeli security establishment, would have little incentive to allow scientific doubt or public fear to deter their progress. So also have funding connections from intelligence, Israeli intelligence. But the point is that they were doing this in Israel because it was a place where they weren't regulating what they could do. It says Pastor spent a couple anxious days weighing what to do. Ultimately, he decided he had to find a way to work with them because they were clearly serious about bringing their technology to the world. And he's worried about that. So he says, like it or dislike it, he said, there is a Stardust, and they are developing from A to Z systems to do stratospheric aerosol injection. It is happening. He thought that by getting involved, he might encourage the company to move out of the shadows, even a little, and that would be a win. Kind of didn't happen, but he goes on to say, or the article goes on, behind the scenes, there's more evidence of a dizzyingly fast timeline. Confidential documents shared with Political Magazine, public records, and interviews with more than 36 scientists, investigators, legal experts, and other familiar with the company reveal an organization advancing rapidly to the brink of being able to press go on a planet cooling plan. Meanwhile, Stardust is seeking U.S. government contracts and quietly building an influence machine in Washington to lobby lawmakers and officials in the Trump administration on the need for a regulatory framework that it says is necessary to gain public approval for a full-scale deployment. What if it's just, what if it's sold as something completely other than climate change? I mean, you could argue a lot of things here. I don't care what you call this. Nobody should want this to happen. Now, I mean, I haven't even gotten to the most alarming points. And I've talked about this before. The idea of doing something that can't be reversed based on the idea that you claim we need to because we're going to die. That doesn't seem to be the case. And then if you were ever to stop, it gets exponentially worse. And the actual definition, by the way, of exponential, it seems to just explode into the problematic situation. So I understand it anyway. And it says the growing gap between Stardust's progress and the public's knowledge of the company has unsettled many scientists. Isn't it always how it goes? Quote, the way they're going about it is absolutely the most toxic, worst way. Typical. As a private company whose technology is subject to little regulation, Stardust and its backers have no legal obligations to adhere to strenuous safety principles or to submit themselves to public view. And the matter could hardly be more urgent. Sunlight-reflecting companies, such as Stardust, could be capable of significantly altering the climate of the entire world in only a few years, and potentially wreaking unforeseen environmental and geopolitical turmoil. Now, yeah, Politico's writing this, yes, but this is even admitted by them. And this is the whole idea. Move fast and break things, Silicon Valley, right? This is what they're pointing to. And they argue that, look, we're going to die if we don't do this, so we got to make a shot. There's no way that logic should allow this to rush forward or happen at all if we look at what's really going on. It says, and they write geopolitical turmoil, by the way, and there's the point to that. But I think I highlighted it, but the discussion of what this may cause in a global geopolitical sense. Like I said, with of countries accusing the other of manipulating their weather. I mean, this is inevitably going to happen, especially if Israel is driving the bus. It says this was why Pastor wanted to participate in this article. He clearly had growing doubts about Stardust's intentions. Was it possible Stardust had simply used him? This is what Politico's writing. To put a respectable face on their operation without taking his concern seriously? Very much so in my mind. That's what they do. Pastor shook his head. I don't want to be totally naive idiot. He says, I mean, it worried me. And I thought about it quite a lot. Are these guys asking me just to use me? To have my name there and then they can do whatever they want? And I didn't get that feeling during the time I worked with them. But that danger is there. Pastor, he paused, and then the moment of doubt was gone. And he said, what can I do about it? I could have said, okay, forget it. I don't want to deal with you, period. That's not what I did, he said. Says the mechanics would be quite simple. Stardust envisages a fleet of around 100 planes to begin with, flying into the stratosphere to deliver payloads of their particles, landing to reload, then immediately taking off again to repeat continuously every flight, a tiny volcanic cough. Yeah, so pretty much what we know they've been doing for a long time, right? Whether it's about stimming or barium and aluminum for other experimentation or whatever else, it's just funny to me that we can act like we don't obviously know. Like, this is the kind of argument that makes people laugh. That you can, like, scientifically show the difference between contrails, like the moisture that evaporates, like any moisture, and the ones that continue to stay in the sky. The idea that they think we're so stupid that we can't recognize that, or, and yet people at the highest level of the conversation lie to your face about that. People in the government who don't know any better, speaking the lie without knowing it. My point, though, is that this is, okay, so this new thing we're doing that you've been doing for 50 years, right? It's obvious there's a part of this isn't always happening. I don't think it was about the sun. I don't think it's about the sun now, or rather about climate change. The particles would then spread around the globe, producing a gradual, uniform decline in global temperature before eventually dropping out of the sky after around a year, so we're told, according to Stardust, and need to be replaced. What a perfect business model. On top of the fact that this stuff will not be okay for you. We've talked about this before. Even the volcanic ash that comes out, has very serious possible side effects. So negative health effect, but we're all going to die. So what are we going to do? That seems to be the general kind of sentiment after every public concern. It says it would be something along the lines of, quote, tens of billions of dollars per year. Yeah, that's nice. In 2024, the bill was $182.7 billion. Faced with this, a few tons of billions could look like a bargain. That the global temperature would drop is not in question, they say. Britain's Royal Society, the August scientific club that counts Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, and him again, Franklin, among his past members, which means nothing to whether they're to be honest or whether they know what they're talking about now. And in a report issued in early November that there was little doubt it would be effective. Yeah, shocker. The people who believe in this think it's going to work. It's funny that you should ask people that have a different opinion than people who already told you this was the only thing that would save us. It says Ben Kravitz, a professor of earth and atmospheric sciences in Indiana University, who has closely studied the potential effects of solar engineering. Basically says, it doesn't mean we can't have broad benefits weighed against bad effects, that he goes on to say. And says, quote, there would be some winners and some losers. But in general, some amount of stratospheric aerosol injection would likely benefit a whole lot of people. Probably most people. Oh, cool. Well, then I wonder who gets to be the losers. I mean, isn't this the same kind of collectivist, paternal, like compulsory moral bioenhancement mindset? Well, yeah, there'd definitely be some people that lose life, happiness, breathing. I mean, what are you talking about? Losers and winners? And it benefits a lot of people, probably most. What are you talking about? So the idea is still in the mindset that we're all so screwed that we're going to do something that will definitely hurt some people, but most will be okay. This is their selling point. I mean, it just shows you the mindset that we're dealing with, guys. It says other scientists are far more cautious. The Royal Society report listed a range of potential negative side effects that climate models had displayed. Climate models. Talk to James Corbett about that, including drought in sub-Saharan Africa. In accompanying documents, it also warned of more intense hurricanes in the North Atlantic and winter droughts in the Mediterranean. But yeah, it's because we do that or we're going to die, right? Let's spin the weather. I mean, this is why I already think in some way we're dealing with some of these problems that they claim is because of climate change, that they're already testing and trying, and it's causing repercussions. One part of it. But what they're saying is if they do this, this could cause, they warned of worse hurricanes in North Atlantic, winter droughts in the Mediterranean. It says, but the picture remains partial, meaning there is no way yet to have an informed debate over how useful or not solar engineering could be. Right. Just like they told you, like Fauci told you. Just got to start giving the shots to find out. Sure. We want to test that on the planet. Hope we don't spin it out of control. I mean, really, even if you think that we're actually at a point where this is that serious, the idea is insane. We're talking about doing something that could cause this permanent damage at a point when we were talking about gradual damage, if that's even what's happening. It says some researchers still don't think the field should be given time and resources. Speaking to reporters in September, Martin Siegert, a professor of geosciences at the University of Exeter, said large-scale solar geoengineering would mean severing. This is so crazy. And this is everything I'm concerned about. He says doing this would mean severing the natural link between the temperature of the planet and the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So they're playing God. And to pretend like they know how they can control this, how often has that worked out for these people telling you they know what they can do? What was COVID? The solution that was worse than the problem, right? Same thing. And Trump literally promised the opposite, like said those words because he knew what we were talking about. He does the same today. But destroy the natural link between the temperature and what the outcome of the planet. It says carbon will continue to build up as long as the world continues to burn oil, gas, and coal, even if sunlight reflecting technology is put to use. The point there, again, for sake of conversation, pretending that the carbon is hurting the planet, the idea is that if like, let's say China doesn't change its work, or even the United States doesn't change, rather its output, and continues to use all these problematic things, and they then use this to try to stop it, that will cause a problem. It says the additional carbon would require more and more cooling to counteract. Good for business like stardust, but has negative potential effects, especially the idea of over-reliance. It says this would do nothing to prevent ocean acidification, localized air pollution, and other harms from drilling, mining, processing, burning fuels. Now, that's, again, if you believe, well, I mean, these things in their own right very much do have negative environmental side effects, whether that's climate change or not. The point is we're talking about doing this as a way to counter out something that would then not stop in the planet. But it goes on to say, and then there's a problem of trying to stop. And I think this is like the argument, guys, that this is even being discussed. I mean, Politico, at least they're giving other people's arguments, the people that don't think it's positive. But I'd love for them to be like, here's a guy who tells you this is going to kill everybody. That's what they should be doing if they want to be really give the full picture. But it says the problem is to trying to stop, because an abrupt end to geoengineering, their $200 billion a year program, got to keep it going. Otherwise we all die. Well, that could be a good sales tactic, but I think the evidence shows they're right about this. An abrupt end to the program with all the carbon still in the atmosphere would cause the temperature to soar suddenly upward with unknown but likely disastrous effects. So now you're held hostage by this forever. Literally forever. Otherwise, so now we have to manage the world's weather. I mean, guys, this is just unrealistically stupid. It says this extremely worrying proposition is referred to by scientists as termination shock. This raises the risk, Pastor said, of extortion by the companies or governments with control over geoengineering. How is that not so obvious to everybody? If Israel's doing it, most importantly, we're talking about the ability to extort or control everything based on the idea that if they stop doing what they're doing, they could, your area would spin out of control. That's assuming they can manage and control it in the first place. And that's what Pastor, the former UN scientist, said. It says, in response to a question about this very concern, Yezvab, the Israeli nuclear scientist, I think CEO, wrote, quote, governments have established mechanisms to prevent misuse of technologies, such as overpricing by their contractors. And we are confident the same would apply here. Yeah, very well. I mean, really? So governments have established ways to stop overpricing of foodstuffs in grocery stores. So it's all good. Oh, yeah? So you're not worried about using a technology that everyone's forcing you into without thinking clearly and then forcing people to, extorting them for its use? But, price controls. We're okay. I mean, what a ridiculous argument. The point is they're just leading into, well, the very governments that you seem to be influencing, if not controlling. Yes. Now, to be objective, we're talking about nuclear scientists, not the Israeli government, but you get my point. I'm very much of the mind that these things are extensions, just like the startup nation conversation and their companies that are run by former UN 200, which are literally acting for Israeli interest, according to their own statements. It says, once the technology is deployed, the entire world would be dependent on it for however long it takes to reduce the 1 trillion or more tons of excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to a safe level. But okay, then they stop, and then what? Carbon will be produced no matter what. On top of the fact that we pointed out, there are plenty of places that are not going to stop what they're doing. So this seems to be impossible, alongside being very alarming and dangerous. It says a process that would involve untold armies of industrial carbon suckers. Right next to all your 5D towers, guys. It says mashed up carbon bonding basalt spread across the fields around the world. Now, let me, this is what they're talking about. This is what they're doing. Untold armies of industrial carbon suckers everywhere. Mashed up carbon bonding basalt spread across fields around the world, which will have effects, guys. Massive reforestation and a host of other novel efforts, all of which have their own downsides. Scientists have estimated that it could take a century or more. Great. What is that, $200 billion a year for a century? If humanity still can't kick its fossil fuel addiction, as they write, and successfully scrub carbon from the sky, the carbon we need to live, scientists say the world would need to stay on the Stardust treatment plan indefinitely. Great business model. But remember, you're also carbon, guys. But clearly, oh, wait, I just lost it. What was the point I was going to make? There's one point in there. Shoot. Oh, that's right. It was just the point of the reforestation. So that's where I was going to make this point. What's interesting to me is it's self-evident. I mean, I think the science is clear. The importance of greenery and trees and plants for cleaning the air. I mean, it's very obvious. So that's why they write, we need massive reforestation. That's always been the argument. More trees. Okay. So then explain for me where this comes from. A long time ago, I really wanted to do a big focus on this, but I got distracted by more important things. But this is from Forbes. Chop down forests to save the planet? Maybe not as crazy as it sounds. I disagree. Bill Gates, of course, and other investors are betting Kodama Systems can reduce carbon dioxide in the air by chopping down and buying trees. Now, what they get into is actually burying. Oh, sorry, I said buying. That's what it was. I was like, that's not right. Burying trees. Now, I mean, really, can anybody even make a logical argument for why that makes sense? I've read this article. A stealth effort to bury wood for carbon removal has just raised millions. 2022. Okay. But over here, we need to do this reforestation or we're all going to die. It doesn't add up to me, other than people are playing God and they're have a different agenda than saving anybody. Where was it here? It says, citing all those reasons, almost 600 academics. Remember the scientists around the globe that signed it saying, insect allies, it's a weapon. Same kind of thing here, but no one's really talking about it. 600 academics signed a 2022 call for a solar geoengineering non-use agreement. Doesn't that seem like it doesn't make sense when you're hearing from the corporate media that all of the scientists agree it's all climate change? Where are these 600 academics coming from? These are people with influence that have different positions of influence that are telling you that they know this is a problem. Now it says, but the international community has taken little action to restrict the idea. One UN body, the Convention on Biological Diversity, has urged against geoengineering. Interesting, right? You'd expect the Convention on Biological Diversity to be something that would be leaning into something that to me seems more politically woke, I guess. It says, has urged against it, quote, until there is an adequate scientific basis. The U.S. is not a signatory. Of course not, because the U.S. doesn't care. They're leaning into this, both sides of the paradigm. But what's interesting is the point to be made is that the argument that the left is that, it's never as simple as that. So you have a UN body, you would argue is just, from the narrative of all one or the other is that the UN is fighting for globalization, and, which I agree with to a lot of sense to the leading body, but not every part of it. They're simply saying we shouldn't do this at all until we have more science. That does not seem like the argument from somebody who is leaning into this for the reason that we would argue. That's what you get from the left-right paradigm conversation, the Alex Jones of the world, right? There's more to it than that. On top of that, the Trump's administration, in many ways already, is partially leaning into this, and I think they're going to even more. And they're not going to call it about fighting climate change, but it is the same ultimate outcome. And the point to always take away is that it's not even about climate change. Neither were the woke pronouns and all the stuff. They weren't really about those things, in my opinion. It was about a means to an end. And they'll take from you every day, you leaning into these or fighting against them when all you're doing is, losing yourself. Now, look, there are reasons to fight against, for example, the trans agenda, whose children are being hurt. There's always something you could call it. But the point is that wasn't, in my mind, what they were truly trying to accomplish. No, but that's actually a bad example because I do think there's an overlap to transhumanism and a lot of the stuff there. But in a general sense, most of these topics, climate change is the point today. I don't believe that's what it's really about. So when they are standing up trying to stop it, it doesn't prove that they're on your, it's never as simple. Question everything. But it says here, these disagreements foreshadow another major downside of the technology, its potential to make heavy geopolitical weather. That's interesting. It says in 2023 report, the Defense Science Board, a panel of scientists convened by the Pentagon, dismissed the oft-discussed scenario of a rogue actor. Of course they did, because they're usually the rogue actor, guys. A state or extremely wealthy person covertly deploying solar geoengineering, which is kind of what's happening right now. I don't even mean like the stuff we've always seen, like what Stardust Solutions is doing. It says flying hundreds of planes into the stratosphere required a major country's backing, they said. Otherwise, countries with supreme air power could easily stop it. Right. So when the U.S. starts supporting them and doing that, then that'll make the point. And it says, but the board did call for the U.S. to establish monitoring capabilities for detecting unusual particles in the stratosphere, a recommendation that Biden administration began to implement. The goal of monitoring system, the board said, was to ensure that the advisory cannot be positioned for strategic surprise in executing unilateral climate interaction action. But what's interesting, the unusual particles and what they're doing to test for that, we're talking about usually like these weather balloons type things. We've seen different versions of that. We've seen them floating over Venezuela, for example. We've seen them going back during the balloons in Iran and the claims and when the Jones and all of us lying about what they thought that was. So who's to know if that's connected or not? But it's interesting to think about that this might be, my thought was, well, they're already doing this. And I think we know this to some degree. So that might be what we're seeing. They're just testing their experiments. But it goes on to say what the U.S. security community is primarily concerned about, said Aaron Sikorski, the director of the Center for Climate and Security, a research center based in Washington, is preventing geoengineering from being taken up by China or Russia, countries the U.S. can't always rein in. See, as always, they don't care about the damage to your body. It's like they can't do it first, or we can't let them be in control. Clearly, it's about the level of being able to, basically hold the world hostage. Using this will be a choke point that nobody can come back from. That they recognize that like, even if they believe this is going to save everybody, that they recognize that ability that will come with it. The capacity for misperception and disinformation would also be huge, said Sikorski. For example, if one country were suddenly struck by a punishing drought, like Iran, for example, it might blame, rightly or wrongly, a neighbor conducting geoengineering. And they wouldn't be wrong to consider that. It says it would be humanity's largest ever entirely deliberate attempt to change the fabric of nature. Why does anybody think that's something we should do? It's a little on the nose, perhaps, that Stardust's first address in a science park on the outskirts of Tel Aviv was Oppenheimer 4. Of course. Here it says Pastor's initial hesitation about working with Stardust wasn't only because the startup aimed to profit from geoengineering. The fact that Stardust was partially an Israeli company was also a big source of doubt. He had been outraged by Israel's war on Hamas. I'm surprised they even wrote this. That had killed thousands of civilians in Gaza. Looks to be about 600, 700,000 that we can prove at this point, by the way. Talk about that in the next show. He says he's outraged by, their genocide is what he's talking about. He believed Israel had violated international humanitarian laws. Guys, this whole thing is so mainstream now. I just want you to recognize that. This is the mainstream the climate change response, and they're like genocide. Now, yes, the Democrats have been much more willing to point that out. But my point is, at the level of this, everyone in the world sees what this is. That point in the conversation we're not talking about today, the genocide. Just important to see. But it does relate to the fact that they're involved, if not running this operation, which should be concerning. And I'll show you that more in depth in a second when we get done with this, like the actual names and what they worked for. As always. He says the Israeli government recently rejected a UN report that concluded the country had committed genocide. Of course, they're going to blame, go, yeah, you got me. We did it. Despite us yelling these, I'll get into it later. Ultimately, his belief in the need for geoengineering regulation won out. And he began working with Stardust not long after 2024. Right? So these people have concerns. Right? More than one, more than just Pastor. And they're working with them because it's like they almost want to be there to make sure nothing goes wrong. It's pretty crazy. Here's the Israeli guys. So far, Stardust has not opened its technology up to public scientific scrutiny. Stardust's ongoing secrecy has left the solar geoengineering experts confused and frustrated. It's been a long time they could have been clear about this. Stardust has tried to consult widely among those working on starlight reflection science, if you want to call it that, but researchers are typically asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement to protect the company's intellectual property. Sure. While not an unusual move for a company with a potentially valuable invention, this is another source of tension with specialists in the field who see such contracts as antithetical to scientific freedom and peer review. I mean, how in the world are we talking about doing something as massive as a global blackout of the or dimming of the sun, and there's not a peer review process? You're not letting other experts go away. I don't know. They claim that that's going to happen, but you have to understand they're already testing this right now. That's in here. On top of the fact, where was it? Not, the non-disclosure agreements. Like, you're talking about something if this is being done in any way, and the potential is the kind of side effect that we're discussing, and people are not being given the opportunity to at least understand what's involved. You don't have to give your proprietary information. What's in it? The point is they could say it right now, and we wouldn't be able to prove it, but they're not even doing that. To tell you what are the ingredients? Why is it not a concern? I find that alarming, especially, again, because it's already being done to some degree, which is enough for me, especially if it goes beyond just what they claim is in there. But researchers said, where was I? While not an unusual move, it's another source of tension. They see it as antithetical to scientific freedom, peer review, especially for technology that would affect every person on the planet. It says, in response to a question about NDAs, one of the Israeli scientists referred them to a section of the website that pledges that in the beginning of 2026, after years of testing, that's my inclusion, the company will start publishing key findings of our research together with our esteemed academic collaborators in peer-reviewed scientific literature. Very different than saying you're going to tell us what's in it and how you're doing it, isn't it? Here's what we've seen. Here's what's happening because of it. It says, he said most scientists Stardust had approached agreed to sign the NDA. Stardust claims to have solved many technical and safety challenges, especially related to the environmental impacts of the particle, which exist, by the way, which they say would not harm nature or people. The reality is any one of these technologies have already been shown to have very clear potential side effects, not just because of the weather changes. But it says, but researchers say the company's current lack of transparency makes it impossible to trust. Quote, there's absolutely no reason to believe anything they say without providing evidence of it, says the Cornell aerospace expert, Mac Martin. He said this flatly. Now it says the document laid out a startlingly ambitious roadmap for Stardust plans. The timeline, for one thing, was jarringly short and raised serious questions about how there could be time for research and regulation when, for example, it aimed to begin, quote, a gradual temperature reduction demonstration in 2027. The presentation also included revenue projections and a series of opportunities to venture capitalists, of course, to recoup their investments. Stardust planned to sign government contracts, set a slide with the company's logo next to an American flag, and considered a potential acquisition by 2028. You realize there's not other flags. They literally put out their slide deck with plans to sign government contracts next to an American flag as they're currently lobbying Trump's administration, as they're working with people in their administration. I mean, it's pretty clear I could be wrong. It may not even, I think it's obvious what they're intending. We could be wrong about what I think will happen, but we'll have to wait and see. And you know what I think? I think this is going to go in that direction, and it'll be framed somewhere else, but it will be ultimately Trump agree to, or somebody from the administration leaning in to allow them to stop climate change or do it for a different framing, the same outcome. It says by 2020 or by 2030, of course, the deck foresaw a large-scale demonstration of Stardust systems. At that point, the company claimed it would already be bringing in $200 million per year from its government contracts and eyeing an initial public offering. And if it hadn't been sold already. Now, hold on a second. I thought that said, let me go back here. The amount, didn't it say, and I've read this more than once, I thought that said more than 200 million a year. I can't see it right now. Well, you guys can go back and read it. Oh, here, maybe I can just test right here. Hold on. 60 million, 75. Or let me look for the billion. That's what I saw. It would be something along the lines of tens of billions of dollars per year. Yeah, that's strange. And then he says in 2024, the bill was 182.7. Huh. So here it says Oh, I get it now. Okay, so what they're claiming is that by 2030, at that point, it would be it would be at 200 million, so arguably less for the diminishing use, which doesn't seem to be the case. If I'm reading that correctly, maybe that's not what they mean. But it says from government contracts and eyeing an initial public offering. Now, it says another page told potential investors Stardust had already run low-altitude experiments using test particles. Exactly. What do you mean test particles? So you're using the particles. I mean, how would you test it if this is clearly just the particles are using in a test in the air. So not really a test, or rather not really something that's in a vacuum. Okay. This is being done in your world already. A puffy white trail stretches out behind it. This is, of course, in Israel though, because apparently there's no regulation about this there. Using a registration code printed on the underside of the wing, we were able to track down the plane's owner, Roy Ben Anat. Guess what? An Israeli aerial enthusiast who built his aircraft himself. Or maybe more than that. Maybe he's works with the intelligence and there's an aircraft with something more on it. I mean, who's to say? The point is, it's wild how it can just be so obviously one-sided, but hey, it's in Delaware, so it's American, right? It says Stardust test details of which have never been revealed to the public, did not break any laws in Israel, providing the substance was, as Stardust would later clarify, not an environmental pollutant. So I guess we take their word for that, according to Elon Tal, a professor of public policy at Tel Aviv University. However, Tal added the fact that experiments geared toward geoengineering could happen outdoors in Israel with no public notice or discussion was evidence of, legally speaking, significant lacunae. I mean, that's just crazy. Why would that be allowed? It's probably already happening everywhere anyway, in my opinion. The pitch deck isn't the only indication the company is moving fast. Stardust's ground game in Washington is equally advanced. It has contracted with lawyers, lobbyists, and advisors who previously served in the White House, Congress, and the Pentagon. Typical for an Israeli company. The point, though, here, guys, is that we already saw Peter Thiel get Donald Trump to essentially almost create, like military tensions with Greenland, or at least like geopolitical issues, just because he wanted Greenland for a freedom city or network state. That's not a joke, by the way. Or regime change or political manipulation in Honduras to make sure they can keep Prospera, or any number of other things. The point is, or Miriam Adelson, who I was going to talk about today with the podium, and so we've already talked about it, but another example of her coming up and him telling you why he's working for Israel. The point is that we're watching, Trump being amenable to people who influence him, or maybe people who have more strings to pull than we can see. That's why I think it's not hard to see him ultimately leaning into this. The startup continues to work with West Exec Advisors, a consulting firm founded by former Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and other veterans of the Barack Obama-Biden administrations, right? So it'll make it even more interesting when that ends up happening. If I could definitely be wrong. The firm is helping Stardust to shape potential U.S. and international regulations around solar geoengineering, according to Columbia Law School professor Matthew Waxman, a former national security official during the George W. Bush administration. Yes, because it's both sides, guys, left and right. Who is working for West Exec on behalf of Stardust, of course. That process of establishing guardrails for potentially using the technology, yet one of the Israeli scientists said, is likely to stretch across multiple administrations. Yep, which is always the point. Because it's not about left and right, guys. We got to start to see that. They're kind of spraying and praying, said Karen. Like they're doing it. The point is, more than once in the article, they make it clear it's already happening. Whether it's in tests or not. What's the difference, if you ask me? Oh, dang it. Okay, got to still have it right there. Sorry for the podcast. I just clicked away from my shot there. So it goes on to say, Vagabond, the Israeli scientist, agreed to speak to the Politico for the story. He, his co-founder, and a Washington-based media advisor flew all the way to London for a conversation in Politico's Soho newsroom. Now, a Washington-based media advisor is not that crazy. It's a pretty contentious topic, but it's interesting. Now, it says alongside him was his co-founder and chief product officer, Amjad Spector, a jumpy 42-year-old who was visibly protective of Yedvab. Interesting. By the name, I'm sure you can already sense, because it's very clear. They're all connected to the same stuff. The pair both, it does say it right there. The pair, both physicists, had previously worked together in Israel's government's nuclear research division. No big deal. During the pandemic, they decided to do something about climate change. Whatever. There's just so many overlapping things. Stardust was ready to announce the $60 million it had raised from 13 new investors. Now, one part I was going to go into, they're tangential. So there's connections that you can make to people that are in Peter Thiel's inner circle, people that are close to Donald Trump, people that are close to the administration. So, I mean, if this was something they wanted to make sure happened, but didn't want it to be clear that was tied back to them because of the obvious political issues, that's how that would work. But it's a hypothetical, right? But I'm concerned about the fact that the investors are tied into the same circles that are people like Karp and Thiel, for one example, that are not about party, right? Both of them, they go whatever direction works for their power. Now it says the money raised was enough to start outdoor contained experiments. That makes sense. As soon as April, he said. These would test how their particles performed inside a plane flying at stratospheric heights. So why would that be contained? Because you're doing it only in one location? That's just a complete misrepresentation. And it says some 11 miles above the Earth's surface. Yedvabs wouldn't say what his particle was made from or where is seeking to patent it. So you don't need to hide that much. If you could tell us that it's the idea of the proprietary part of it, I understand. But they're not even telling you what's in it in any sense. You know what I mean? Like I'm very worried about that. The key thing, he insisted, was the particle was safe. You know, when that's all you get, that's safe and effective. Doesn't it make you feel the opposite? It would not damage the ozone layer. And when the particles fell back to Earth, they could be absorbed back in the biosphere, he said. Though it's impossible to know this is true until the company releases its formula. Right. Politico's correct. But did you notice what I said? Did you get what I just picked? I mean, how could you know? But did you pick up on something right there? The key thing, he insisted, it was safe. Okay, safe for what? Safe for you? Here's what he says after that. It would not damage the ozone layer. Okay. When the particles fell back to Earth, they would be absorbed in the biosphere. Okay, but does that then have any way to affect anything else? Or is it only safe for the ozone layer and the atmosphere? Like, you have to understand, even if it's in the bio, these things have been proven to fall at that level back down to Earth in many ways. Didn't seem to make it clear that it's safe for you. I just think that's important to point out. It says he admitted there was no way to know. Oh, and then again, the party said right there is first, they said there's no way to take any face value without knowing the formula, which is true. But he goes, he admitted there was no way to know every negative side effect without releasing the particle to scale, meaning these tests even won't tell you for sure. The only way we'll know is to let it out everywhere. Very Fauci of you. It says this solution won't be without consequences. Yes, exactly. So we shouldn't do this. Their argument is because we're all going to die, so we have to accept those consequences. I don't agree with that. I think that's wrong. In fact, I think we can prove that. And in fact, I think in many cases you can prove that they don't think that. Each time he was probed on a safety issue, he would eventually offer the same response. The only way to discover whether solar geoengineering is a good idea is to do it. And only deep, careful regulation can make that happen safely. It seems like they're desperate to immerse themselves more with the government. Why would you want regulation if no company I know wants that. So that to me shows the Israel government part of it. He says, you don't take medicines or get on airplanes unless you've been vetted by the feds, he argued. We raised the point, Politico says, that the current state of the world is hardly ripe for a collaborative global effort to regulate solar geoengineering, which is a good point. Even if you get most countries, that then still means plenty of them won't be on board, which means it's obviously set up to fail. It says to that, Yedvab said that the severity of the climate impacts meant it would be unethical to not make that effort. You see that logic or lack thereof? So it doesn't matter how bad it can be because it's so bad now we have to. But is it? I look around. Does it look bad to you? Maybe the narrative is bad. Look, I could definitely be wrong. I ask all of you out there to actually take the time to dive into other people's arguments. If you think it's absolutely, we're all going to die from climate change, look to people out there who are making scientific arguments for why that's not the case. At least consider what they're saying. Look at James Corbett, Tony Heller, okay? Now, if you believe that it doesn't have any effect, same point, just because it's in your interest. Look to why they're arguing that. Why are they? You probably did already, but if you didn't, look at their arguments, look at why they think, and you'll find very quickly that there's a lot of gaps. Now, I shouldn't even say it like that. Just look for yourself and you can come to your conclusions about it. My opinion is there's a lot of gaps. He says, we raised the point of the current, we raised the point, the current state of the world is hardly right for this situation. To that, Yedvab said that the severity, I already read that. Dismissing something that could theoretically help, he said, is not a privilege that I think we have as humanity have. Same point. In the end, it shouldn't be Stardust's responsibility to decide whether its product is safe, he said. That's the job of the government, international institutions. Great. So it's not our job to make sure our product's safe. Doesn't that seem ridiculous? Like, yes, it is. It's also the government's job, in essence, to regulate the negative effects of things that are being used like this. Hopefully we can get to a point to where, there's a lot of arguments to make about how that should work. The reality is where we are. To me, that seems like you're bucking, you're just going, it's not our, if it's bad, it's all their fault. That's like the COVID-19 thing again. Lastly, it says, it's at least ironic that the plan for preventing Stardust from adding to human misery relies on the same beleaguered international system that has repeatedly come up short. Whether COVID-19, now they say in response to climate change. I just think the point's valid without that, or in spite of that. Because the reality is they've come up short in every way you could possibly look at the responses to things, because, or even like with a U.S. perspective, it's because I don't think they have an interest in doing so. You can think for yourself, but at the end of the day, this is set up to fail. And I think by design in many ways. So the point to end with was the people that think we're all going to die. This is what you get. The John Kerry, oh my God, it's so unprecedented. But by definition, it is not unprecedented. Literally not unprecedented. So you can see the red line. Now, this is from a climate concerns post, but you can see this from many different things. This is from ABC. I'll show, it's very clear. The data is easy to look up. The point is simply, and this comes from, where's the, it didn't say on it exactly, but the graph is pretty much the same wherever you look. This one I think says, right here from, this is from their data from their news station. So the point is, unprecedented spike when you only look for a certain amount of years. When you go back, as I said earlier, you can see the red line being normal. You can see the different spikes, or rather average. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the one right before that, guys, is higher than this. So how can that be unprecedented in any sense? On top of that, it's clearly not led to the destruction of the planet. I just think it's insane and obvious and irrational to think anything other. Now, and on top of the fact that there's scientists that are, I think, far more respected who are telling you, look, the idea is insane. You're talking about removing what is needed for human species to exist. But here's just the same graph, right? You can see the same right there. It's pretty wild to me. Now, here's the people involved. This is a list of the Israeli connections. Key Israeli connections, founders and leadership, CEO, co-founder. That's the YEDVAB we talked about. Former deputy chief scientist at the Israeli Atomic Energy Commission. It oversees their nuclear program. And yes, they do have nuclear weapons. That should be obvious by now. Chief product officer and co-founder Amyad Spector, former physicist at the Israel's Negev Nuclear Research Center, and government R&D roles. So yes, so they're working on weapons. Lead scientist and co-founder Eli Waxman, which, by the way, let's not forget, they use those consistently on people in Gaza. And then they sell them around the world as battle tested, with a quote, not a joke. Abby Martin's done a whole thing on that. Professor at the Weizmann Institute of Science, former chief scientist at the Israeli Atomic Energy. Literally, the 3 leading founder people are Israeli nuclear scientists. Why does that even make sense for climate change? It doesn't. It's incredible. Company structure and operations. Israeli subsidiary, Stardust Labs handles most of its activities. So an Israeli company handles most of the activities of this supposedly American Delaware company. Listed as the Israeli startup on platforms like Startup Nation Finder. Literally the Startup Nation conversation that it's about them creating companies to affect supply chains for intelligence. And the idea is that this is listed on their startup discussion. Frequently described at media as a U.S.-Israeli or Israeli-U.S. startup. Why? Because you chose to pretend it's in Delaware? Early investors, AWZ Ventures, and a Canadian Israeli VC firm. It's just so ridiculous. Solar Edge, an Israeli renewable energy company. So basically every single part of this is Israeli, outside of the Canadian venture part of it connected to the Israeli company, or the Delaware choice of where you claim it is, or rather where you claim it's based out of, even though everything happens in Israel, R&D in Israel. Even the operations conducted through the subsidiary. It's just all the face. Now check this out. The AWZ Ventures, the Canadian Israeli VC firm, with partnerships to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. So you actually do have funding connections to go right back to the government and the intelligence apparatus, because it says some reports highlight their ties to Israeli intelligence. Funding companies linked to Unit 8200. What do you know? Wow. Later funding Okay, maybe got funding after that from other people. Nope. Primarily from, oh, sorry. I thought that said Israeli. Not primarily non-Israeli after that. So the other influx. Just, it's incredible to me how many times that can happen and how many people choose to pretend it's not there. It's just wild. Bill Gates cutting down trees. And I'll leave you with some good interviews we had with Dane Wigington about this. Geoengineering, nanotech, and biocarrier platforms for pathogen dispersion. Very relevant, by the way, to the connection to the main conversation, right? The whole point, as well as this one. Dane Wigington, geoengineering and climate change, gambling with the human species. Both of these very much connect with even the original conversation, right? Biocarrier platforms, pathogen dispersion. So whether we're talking about spraying from the sky to use that back to the original conversation to then use something outside to manipulate that, or that itself. I mean, very clear that this is at least possible. So, I know to a lot of people, some of the stuff we discussed today is going to be ridiculous, just crazy outside their own possibility, but it's not. Whether it's being done, that's debatable. The fact that it's there, well, I mean, you could always argue that maybe the entire thing, they're lying about what they claim they're doing. That's something to consider, but it's something difficult to prove. And I think you can very clearly prove that some of this stuff is in reality happening. So we know the technology is there based on what they're showing us. So we can't step back and go, is it possible that they could use this in various ways? I mean, historically, they always have. It's worth our time, guys. But at least discuss this, get the information out there for people to check out, let me grab something before we leave here. I forgot about this clip. Yeah, nice. I do have that. Here, I'm going to end with this clip from Dane Wigington. I use this to open the show on one of the interviews, and it's a clip from his documentary, The Dimming, and it shows you the technology on the planes. That's very real. It's been used, been proven, and the reality is we're just lied to about it for a long time. So we should consider how much more we're being lied about and what new lies they're using to shove us into the next step. So hopefully that all went well today. Let me know if you had any issues. I'm going to maybe deal with this tomorrow. I have an interview scheduled tomorrow. Hopefully that works out fine. I was maybe trying to get out the rest of that content I was going to have, but I'm going to try to get this squared away even better than I have now. I'm worried that whatever's going on is going to adapt to this, and I won't be able to use this with the, for those that tune in at the beginning, you'll hear what I'm talking about. If you just jumped in, we've been dealing with technological issues. And so rather what I think are something more than that, possibly being, hacked, compromised, something like that. Well, either way, like I said to start, I'm going to find a way to put content out one way or the other because it matters to me. So if you believe in what we're doing, as always, we put this out for free because we believe in the content. Let us know what it means to you. We can't do this without you. So thank you for tuning in today. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
This engine, a high bypass turbofan jet engine, this is the engine that is on all military tankers and all commercial carriers, is in essence a jet-powered fan. 90% of the air that moves through this engine is non-combusted. This engine by design is nearly incapable of producing any condensation trail except under rare and extreme circumstances. And again, we have film footage of aircraft flying at altitude with nozzles visible, turning on and off. That is the end of the argument. Since even before man could fly, there was an effort to try to modify the weather. We have weather modification patents going back 100 years plus.